On a cold January morning, EMT partners Dave Marquez and James Bell have pulled into a local gas station.
Come on, Davey boy, let's go. It's getting cold in here.
You're funny.
Medic 34, we have a report of an unconscious male bleeding outside in the 200 block of North Union Boulevard.
Well, it's a typical day for them, and all of a sudden they hear the call come over the radio.
Come on, we got a call. We gotta go. 10-4.
So they stop what they're doing and proceed to the 200 block of North Union Boulevard.
What's interesting is that this isn't the type of crime that you would see in broad daylight. So I imagine for the people who came across the victim, there was a lot of curiosity about what was going on.
He still is holding a handgun and his finger is in the trigger. And so they feel like they need to take care of that situation before they're able to administer any aid to this person.
Get everybody back.
Is it the kind of thing where maybe he's gonna roll over, and use that weapon?
He does appear to have some signs of life, and even some kind of twitching reaction could cause a discharge of the weapon. So they have to really approach him with a lot of caution.
Across town, Lt.Joe Kenda is in the middle of renewing his handgun qualifications.
The requirement on the police department was you had to qualify with your pistol once a month. So you would go to a police range and you would fire your weapon. Colorado can be bitterly cold in January, but the PD has policies in place. If it's your time to shoot and it's 20 below zero, you better be at the range because that's where you're supposed to be.
Excuse me, Lieutenant. Phone call just came in. They're requesting you on Union Boulevard. There's been some kind of shooting.
Okay, thanks.
I was at the range, suffering in the weather.
Gotta go.
All right, next time.
And I left. Turning the heater in the car on to full blast and then driving over to the scene.
Hey, Lieutenant.
Hey, Tammy. So what do we got?
Apparently it was a pretty wild scene. Medics found the man twitching on the curb and he had a gun in his hand.
EMTs, but we also train them for crime scenes, not to move things unless they're absolutely necessary. So the EMT felt it was crucial that he get that gun away from him.
It was a little dicey, but they were able to get the weapon away without it discharging.
What do we know about the victim?
Not much. He didn't have ID on him.
The officers at the scene, they report that there was a Caucasian male suffering at least one gunshot wound to the chest. He's taken to Memorial Hospital and he's pronounced DOA.
The victim may be gone, but Kenda has little trouble determining the spot where EMTs found him.
He's collapsed because of the temperature. The blood is frozen.
There's his weapon, and it is loaded.
The gun has 6 live Remington Peters .357 Magnum hollow point bullets loaded in the cylinder.
Hasn't even been fired.
As to why it hasn't been fired, I don't have any idea. You have a reasonable assumption to believe that our man here got himself into a gunfight, and he's obviously the loser. He never got a round off, so maybe he's not very good at gunfights. Who knows?
Go ahead and run the serial number to see what we can find out.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you.
The serial number is always run through the system to determine if there is ownership. There is a firearms transaction record that is available, so we're hopeful what we can learn about this individual.
While his team checks the gun serial number, Kenda and Detective Skip Arms head to Memorial Hospital to get a first-hand look at the victim.
Hello, detectives.
Hey, Doc. So what we got?
Come take a look at this.
He has a gunshot wound in the right side of the chest at an angle. He's shot in the heart, or in the aorta at least, which is an absolute fatal shot. There's no stippling or tattooing, no powder, so it probably some distance from where his shooter was standing.
But actually, he's been shot twice. Help me flip him over. So the second round goes into his shoulder and enters into the chest cavity as well.
The doctor points out an entrance gunshot wound in his back. So what does that mean? It's possible he takes the first shot in the chest and he runs from that shot and is shot again. But did he get shot again in 0.5 seconds or did he get shot again in 1.5 minutes?
I don't think he went far after he received these wounds.
The doctor didn't believe that the individual would have been able to travel very far before collapsing. So this is something that had to have happened fairly close by to where he was found.
But Kenda's questions about where the shooting occurred can wait. First, he and Detective Arms must determine who is this person.
Let's get a picture of him, or maybe somebody will recognize him, even the way he looks.
Yeah, there's a camera right here.
Can we tilt his head up a bit?
Yeah, sure.
All right, thanks, Doc.
Yep, good luck, man.
Do me a favor. Call down the station and have them get a description of this guy out to the public.
Will do. And hopefully they'd finish tracing the serial number on that gun.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Hey, I was just looking for you.
Well, hello there, stranger.
Hello, dear.
In 1987, my wife was employed at Memorial Hospital, so she was working that day.
I'll see you later.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi, Skip. Bye, Skip.
Just got off the phone with the station. Turns out the gun that our victim was holding was registered to a Steve Grove.
All right, let's go see if we can find an address for him.
Well, is that Stephen Grove laying in the hospital morgue, or is it somebody else?
Using the information provided on the gun registration, Kenda and Arms head out, hoping they finally identified their victim.
We go over to the address, and we're hoping at that point that we can find somebody who knows who Steve Grove is and tell us something about him.
We're the CSPD?
You know a gentleman named Steve Grove?
Yeah, that's me. What's going on?
We've got a little problem, Mr. Grove.
I said, we have a man at Memorial Hospital who's been shot to death. He has your gun in his hand. So we're investigating a death of an unknown male, collapsed face down with this gun in his hand. We find the registered owner to be very much alive. He has some explaining to do.
Listen, I have an unidentified dead guy with your fully loaded gun in his hand. Do you mind telling me why that is?
Yeah, my gun was ripped off last week.
Your gun was stolen. Really?
Yeah.
The standard reply to why does this bad guy have your gun is the gun is stolen. You're accustomed to hearing that excuse? How convenient, Mr. Grove.
Yeah, I got the police report and everything if you'd like to see it.
Yeah, okay, sure.
Here you go.
And it's one of our tear sheets. I recognize it immediately.
See, it says right there it was stolen.
Okay, I see it. Take it easy.
So Mr. Grove's standard bad excuse turns out to be an excellent excuse. He didn't have the gun. A burglar had the gun. So that leads to the question, is Mr. X, among his other talents, a burglar?
Once we were comfortable that it was in fact a legitimate theft of the gun, we wanted to try to figure out if perhaps he might recognize who the burglar was.
I've got a picture I want to show you. I want you to tell me if you recognize the guy in it. Before I do, I want to warn you, it's not an easy one to look at, okay?
Okay. Man, that's not pretty.
You recognize the guy?
No. Not at all.
Okay, thank you. So he's a burglar. And Mr. Grove has no clue who he is.
The investigation appears to be stalling out until Kenda receives a much welcomed tip.
Lieutenant Kenda.
We got a telephone call from
Yes, ma'am.
a woman who was an apartment manager And based on the initial information that had been put out to the public for assistance, she thought she recognized the description as to somebody she knew.
I'll write this down. What's his name? Scott Fulbright. And his roommate, Daryl Brosa, E-R-O-S-A.
At a residence just east of downtown, Kenda hopes this latest lead produces better results.
Do you know someone named Scott Fulbright?
Yeah, that's my roommate. Is he in some kind of trouble?
I think it'd be best if we sat down.
Okay. Sorry about the mess. We don't have people over very often.
We tell him we are investigating a shooting incident in which we believe that Scott Fulbright is potentially the victim of multiple gunshot wounds that has caused his death.
I have a picture I want you to take a look at.
And yeah, that's my roommate.
Mystery solved. Scott Fulbright is Mr. X.
What happened to him?
Well, that's what we're trying to find out. Can you tell us about him?
I haven't known him for very long.
According to Daryl Brosa, Scott Fulbright is a 23-year-old building custodian from Texas.
He says that he met him. He was out hiking one day. Scott Fulbright newly arrived in the area. He needed a place to stay. They kind of hit it off.
Daryl told us that Scott was kind of in a tough place. He wasn't happy with his job, and Daryl offered up to let Scott live with him.
The first thing you asked is if he was in any trouble. Why would you ask that?
Oh, man. Scott was a great guy, but as I got to know him a little better, I realized he'd had some money problems. He didn't always do the right thing.
Daryl was able to tell the police that Scott had been involved in burglaries, that he maybe was not the clean-cut guy that he thought he was originally.
You ever see him with a gun?
Yeah, just recently. He was sitting right over there cleaning it. What is that, man?
What do you think it is? It's a gun. Check it out.
What the hell, dude? Get that out of here.
Can you describe it?
It was a big revolver, you know? Black with wood grips on it.
It basically matched the description of both the gun that we found at the scene as well as what was described by Steve Grove in his theft.
Did he commit any of the crimes around here?
Yeah. I was actually with him for one of them.
You were with him?
Yeah, but I had no idea what he was up to. We were just in my car, and he asked me to wait for him while he ran into this guy's house. When he came out, he had all these coins on him.
So coins draw burglars like a magnet. You could hit the jackpot and find that rare coin that some person has that is extremely valuable.
And what'd you say when you saw these coins?
I didn't know what to say.
This is good. Hey, just hang here. I'm just gonna run in and talk to him. 2 seconds. I'll be right back.
All right, hurry up.
Let's go. Come on.
Where'd you get those?
I took them.
You took them?
Yeah, I need it more than he did. Drive, come on.
But that's why I was trying to get him to move out. I swear to you, I had no idea he was going to steal those coins.
Well, I appreciate your help.
Yes, sir.
We'll let ourselves off.
So now our hero has coins he's taken in a burglary. He's got a gun. Maybe now he's going to be an armed robber.
On a hunch, Kenda reaches out to dispatch to see if there's recently been any armed robberies in the area.
Yes, Lieutenant. We've got officers right now investigating an armed robbery at a precious metals dealer on North Union Boulevard. It happened earlier today.
Do you happen to know if they deal in rare coins?
Affirmative.
10-4, Kenda out. All right, let's go.
What if he believed that he's going to walk in this business with a very large gun and he's going to scare everybody to death and he's going to get money? This certainly has our interest. We have finally identified our victim. He is Scott Fulbright. We know he likes coins, and we just are investigating, as we speak, an armed robbery of a gold, silver, and rare coin dealer in this same neighborhood. Is Fulbright our man? Well, let's go see. This place is only a couple of blocks away from where Mr. X is found. There's a guy coming out emptying the trash.
How you doing? I'm Lieutenant Kenda.
All right.
Do you work here?
Oh, yeah, I'm actually the owner, David Bayek.
Do you mind if we come in and ask you a few questions?
Yeah, sure.
When Kenda enters the coin shop, he's surprised to find no overt signs that a robbery has recently transpired.
Nothing appears to be out of place. Nothing appears to be broken. The cases are all intact. Everything looks quite normal.
So, did you happen to get a good look at this guy?
Yes.
We have a photograph of your robbery suspect.
Oh my God, yes, that's him. That's him. Arthur, come here, quick. Take a look. Isn't that the guy that was in here?
Yeah, that's the guy.
Owner David Bayek and employee Arthur Jorgensen explained that around 11 a.m., David pulled a gun on a would-be robber.
Did I do that? I didn't even know I shot him.
It's clear to me from his expression and the look on his face, he had no idea that the armed robber was even hurt.
Well, most business owners have a weapon nearby that they can get to in the event of a robbery. They were defending themselves, shots were fired, and they had actually hit the suspect.
Well, before we go any further, I'm gonna have to advise you of your rights. Because there's a death involved, there's the possibility that charges can be filed.
Anytime anybody dies violently, as Mr. Fulbright certainly did, their potential exists for felony criminal charges. So we advise David and his partner both of their rights.
But we really have to try to pin down what occurred to see if we have somebody that's going to be charged with murder, or is this going to be basically a justified shooting because it was in self-defense?
That's all right. We'll talk.
You sure about that?
Yes.
Let's talk over here.
So we independently interviewed both individuals to tell us the details of what happened when Scott Fulbright entered this business.
Tell me what happened here.
Well, I was opening up just like any other day. So this guy comes in and just immediately just doesn't feel right about him, you know?
David explains that he just looks like a kind of a shady character. And it made me nervous when I saw him.
Morning, sir. How can we help you today?
He's sort of casing out the place, kind of wandering around, and I look over for a second. The next thing I know,
Give me the money! Give me the money!
Now, armed robbers are usually not violent. They want to threaten you, frighten you into giving them what they want. In this case, he wants the money back.
There's no money!
I keep a gun in my vest, so I reach over for it.
David has a Colt Cobra 2-inch 38 caliber revolver. He's not that familiar with them, but he believes his partner's about to die.
There's no money! There's no money!
In his excitement, he has an accidental discharge. Fortunately for his partner, and fortunately for him, Mr. Fulbright didn't start shooting.
He's aiming his gun at me, and I fired 2 shots.
Did you get him? I don't know.
There's no blood in the store, because of course he's wearing a heavy coat, so any blood's contained in his clothing. But David doesn't know if he hit him or not. He doesn't think he did. Well, now he knows he not only hit him, he killed him.
Hearing David's description of the shooting, Kenda now understands the odd placement of the wounds found on Scott's body.
If rounds are fired in rapid succession, sometimes just the initial energy from the first gunshot is going to contribute to spinning a body around. So that would be consistent of the suspect turning to leave in an effort to get away.
This is awful. I feel sick.
We'll stay in touch, let you know what's happening. Thank you.
I'm sure that David and Arthur wake up every day, think about, this isn't something we wanted to do. It'd be a heavy, heavy burden on your heart to know that you have taken someone's life. But in that instance, you do what you think is right to protect yourself.
Once this investigation was completed, we present it to the district attorney's office for their review. It was their determination that this was self-defense, so there were no charges that were ever filed against David for his actions in taking the life of Scott Fulbright.
Mr. Fulbright engages in armed robbery, which by nature is a dangerous business. He found out how dangerous.
Coming up, a single gunshot takes an innocent life, and a minute piece of evidence holds the key to unlocking a mysterious murder.
This is an absolute game changer. What we suspected could be true, now we know is true.
After working through an action-packed Halloween weekend, Lieutenant Kenda is finally relaxing at home, hoping for a chance to watch the 11 o'clock news.
Something the police look forward to is the wrap-up of the Halloween weekend, because everybody's wearing a mask, everybody robs everybody else. You're concerned about little kids out walking down the street. So I'm watching the end of the news, and a phone call comes.
It's Kenda.
They have a shooting victim, and I'm off to work.
Hey, Lieutenant.
How you doing? So what we got?
Got a female victim. The gunshot wound to the head.
Police identify the victim as 29-year-old Tina Lovato, a dedicated mother of 5.
Any leads on what happened?
Appears to be a possible suicide. When I got here, there were 2 guys standing over her. Looks like they know her.
All right, let's go take a look.
Yes, sir.
In the front living room, Kenda gets his first look at the deceased.
There's no question she's been shot in the head. There's a great deal of hemorrhagic bleeding, very thick blood everywhere. It's a mess. There's an effect that happens to the human eyes and a human head. It's called raccooning. The human head is a vacuum. You introduce a supersonic projectile into that vacuum. It results in an implosion. The eyes bulge, hence the expression raccooning.
This raccooning effect tells us that the weapon had to be close proximity to the skin or the muzzle. There's a Ruger Red Hawk 357 Magnum on the scene in the immediate vicinity of the victim. So it appears that she shot herself.
Let's have the coroner check her hands for trace blood evidence and do a GSR test as well.
Yes, sir.
What's this? I Heart Darren. What are the names of the guys that are possible witnesses?
Darren Carroll and Bert Lewan.
Darren Carroll, the man standing outside, is involved romantically with this victim. He was found kneeling over the body when the police officers arrived.
It's time to go talk to these guys.
Lieutenant, one thing about Darren, he had some blood spatter on him.
Most likely the victim's blood. So he is, at a minimum, a close eyewitness.
Any information on the other guy?
Yes, sir. Bert is her cousin.
All right, I want to talk to the family member first.
Yes, sir.
Bert is related to the victim, and Darren is apparently in love with the victim.
Bert? Yeah. I'm Lt.Joe Kenda. Sorry about what happened to your cousin.
This is rough.
I was really close to Tina. We actually grew up kind of rough because our mom passed away, and so my dad had her raises. She started a young family, and she just did the best she could to raise her kids. She was a good person.
Can you tell me what happened tonight?
She was really upset. I should have seen this coming. Her brother just went to prison, and her boyfriend Darren and I, we just wanted to cheer her up.
That was so much fun, guys.
Bert says they all got pretty drunk. And once they got home from the bar, that Tina and Darren started having an argument when they were together in the next room. So he decides he better look in on him and see that everything's okay. He sees him talking quietly and kissing. He decides that, well, whatever it was, it certainly isn't an issue now.
And so I just walked away. That's when I heard a gunshot.
He finds Darren kneeling over her.
Oh my God, what happened? He shot himself. Oh my God. I didn't know what to do. I was in shock. So I just ran and called 911.
Now we know that Darren was in the room alone with the victim when the shot was fired.
Thank you.
So now our mission is to talk to Darren and find out what he has to say for himself.
Darren? I'm Lt.Joe Kenda. Sorry about what happened. I understand that you and Tina were dating?
I met Tina when we were about 12 years old. We had maintained a relationship, as far as friends, all through going up to school, and then connected into a physical relationship, and her and her kids moved down to live with me in Colorado Springs. Our relationship was going really good.
So what happened here tonight?
Tina hasn't exactly been herself lately. We knew she was really depressed.
Darren pretty much supports what Bert says. She'd been very depressed. They thought to go out, have a few drinks, and she'd feel better.
That was
When they finally came back from the bar,
Come on, let's go to bed.
they got in a little bit of an argument.
We'd had a lot to drink already. She wanted to go back out again. I tell her I had to go to work the next day, and I couldn't.
Come on, Darian. Let's go to another bar or something. I want to go out
to another bar. I got mad.
Fine, you want to go? Go. Just leave me alone, huh? Get out of here.
And I took my jacket off, and I had a .357 revolver that I always had in a shoulder holster.
Darren admits that he carries a gun.
Okay, I'm sorry, babe. I'm sorry. Come here.
She said, I'm sorry. And she hugged me, and we kissed.
Darren tells Kenda that he believes everything is fine, when suddenly, Tina pulled the gun from his exposed shoulder holster.
He says he realizes what she intends to do. He tries to bear hug her from behind
Stop it! Tina, stop!
to gain control of the weapon.
Stop!
She pulls the trigger, shoots herself in the head, and falls to the floor.
Oh my God, Tina!
And he says that's how he gets blood all over him.
I tried to stop her. I couldn't.
I'm very sorry. I understand how difficult this must be.
Though Darren Carroll seems genuinely distraught, Kenda's not sure the incident played out exactly the way it's been described.
How does it go from an evening out drinking and running around to coming home and having an argument over something minor and then kissing and making up and then killing yourself? I'm not comfortable with this at all.
With autopsy results not due until later in the morning, Kenda decides to seek out additional information about Tina.
Bert Luan has told us that he has informed the family and that the family is gathered at Robert Salazar's house, which is Tina's brother, and they're all aware of her death, so we at least do not have to make a death notification.
Once inside the home, it's clear to Kenda that Tina's family is taking her death extremely hard.
Lieutenant Kenda?
Yes.
I'm Tina's brother, Robert. My cousin Bert told me you guys might be coming by. Listen, can we maybe talk in the kitchen?
Yeah, sure.
I left another detective there with the family, so Robert and I now have this opportunity to speak privately.
Very sorry all this happened. What was it you wanted to tell me?
It's just this whole thing, Bert calling me on the phone, telling me that Tina killed herself. There's no way she would have done that.
Well, Robert, this investigation has just taken a 180-degree turn now, hasn't it? So we're going into this case initially, finding two people standing over a dead girl. Both believe that she's committed suicide, and we're now encountering her brother, who said that's not even possible and says he knows why.
And what makes you so sure that Tina wouldn't have shot herself?
Well, first and foremost, her kids. She loved her kids. She would never leave them.
Tina knew how tough it was. Our family raised without our mother. She would never do that to her 5 kids. She loved her kids so much.
There's something else I think you should know.
What's that?
Tina's afraid of guns. She wouldn't even pick one up, let alone shoot herself.
And I say, can you explain to me Tina's relationship with Darren Carroll?
Oh, how do I put this? Tina, she didn't always have the best taste in guys.
He goes on to explain that his sister tends to be attracted to people who turn out to be emotionally abusive and verbally abusive. And Darren is another example. He could be insanely jealous of her if they were out in public.
Never really liked him.
The first time I met him, they had came up to Denver, and my sister wanted to go out dancing. And we were dancing, and he just kept getting jealous over her own brother dancing with her. So it was like, it threw a vibe off that I didn't like at all. So I really didn't care for the guy.
Look, Tina didn't do this. She didn't kill herself. Somebody killed her.
Robert Salazar is Tina's brother. He has a feeling and an impression of her that he thinks is accurate. Could it also be that Tina, in a fit of depression, kills herself? Yeah, that could still be true.
Well, thank you, Robert. It's been very helpful. Again, I'm very sorry for your loss. I'll be in touch.
So we're still in a position of not knowing. We need hard evidence to tell us what happened to Tina Lovato. That I hope to gain at an autopsy.
Later that morning, Kenda meets with the coroner at the morgue.
The doctor has already examined her to a large extent, and what he has to say to me is an absolute game changer.
Come take a look at this. The gunshot wound is 5 centimeters off the center line of the lower jaw. It has an imperfect seal, and it was at close range.
Right.
What he means by that is there is some degree of distance between the end of the muzzle and the flesh itself on her head. In self-inflicted wounds, people press the gun in to make certain that they're going to die.
It's not what I typically see in cases of suicide.
Right.
Do we know if she was right or left-handed?
Yeah, her family told one of my detectives that she's right-handed. Why?
We found traces of blood spatter in the palm of her right hand.
Now, it would be impossible for Tina Lovato to be holding a gun and allowing blood spatter to somehow magically pass through the grip and reach her palm undisturbed. She absolutely, positively, beyond any doubt, did not have a gun in her hand when she was shot. If it wasn't in her hand, she didn't shoot. Somebody else did.
The following morning, Kenda brings Tina's boyfriend, Darren Carroll, down to the station for a second, more pointed conversation.
Hello again, Mr. Carroll.
Hello.
I always assess people's body language initially. What are you doing in here that indicates your level of involvement? Because people unconsciously do it. And his appearance is very damning. Everything about him says, I killed Tina Lovato.
All right, here's the deal, Darren. We have blood evidence that proves there's no way Tina could have shot herself. I mean, how do you explain the blood in her hand?
I don't know. I don't know how that happened.
Then we start hitting him with some of the conflicting evidence. We start getting those typical answers you almost see out of a 5-year-old when you ask them, hey, who broke this? I don't know. You can't explain it, so it becomes an I don't know.
I keep pressing the point with him. I just keep at him and at him and at him.
Darren, we found out that Tina was terribly afraid of guns. Nothing of what you said works.
I didn't mean for this to happen. It was an accident.
And he finally just stops everything, and he starts to cry.
Well, like I said before, Tina and I were arguing about going back out to another bar again.
And that's all? You weren't fighting about anything else?
Yeah, no, I mean, I wasn't too happy. Before, when we went out, guys would always look at her and try to hit on her and come on to her and stuff, and then I just got sick of it, you know?
Exactly the behavior that men engage in who are emotionally abusive. Exactly the behavior that Robert Salazar said he was aware of.
We made up when we started kissing.
Can we please go out? Come on, please.
All right, you want to go? Come on, let's go. But I'm going to tell you, the next guy that looks at me funny or that tries to hit on you, I'm going to shoot him in the face.
Put that away.
So that's how the gun gets introduced.
Stop. Get your hand off.
Put it away.
Stop it.
Put this away.
They apparently struggle over the possession of it.
Stop it. Let go. Stop.
We don't know why, but they wind up in a struggle over it. Maybe she wants to put it away. What kind of sense does it make to have a physical confrontation in close proximity to each other over a loaded gun? What's going to happen here?
Wait! Stop it! Put the gun down! Stop!
Wait!
Tina, stop!
Bang is what's going to happen.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
The next thing that I remembered was that I heard the gun. I was behind her to where my face was right here, and right here her hair flew up when that gunshot went off.
Oh my God. Tina! Tina!
I laid her down on the carpet, and it was like blood was just coming up from the carpet.
Oh my God.
And I didn't know where it was coming from, so I started grabbing her head all around, trying to find out where the hole was at. I wanted to put my finger in there and stop the bleeding. I had recollection of having the gun, in my hand, and but I don't have the recollection of pulling the trigger. It was like when I heard the gunshot, it was like I came into a whole different realm, I guess.
It was an accident. You gotta understand, okay? I didn't mean for this to happen.
Of course you didn't, Darren.
I told him, Darren, it doesn't matter how sorry you are, how little you meant it. You recklessly were in possession and the handling of a firearm, and Tina Lovato paid for that with her life. You're responsible for this death. You, not her, not the man on the moon, just you.
After much consideration, Darren Carroll accepts a plea bargain and is sentenced to 6 years in prison for rape.
It happened in a matter of less than a minute. But it certainly was reckless. And Darren Carroll is forced to live with the fact he caused Tina Lovato's death for the rest of his days.
They called it closed, but Dublin still hears it an invisible siren that only sounds after midnight, when rain bruises the streetlights and every step on cobblestone feels like an echo from 1994. The city learned a new kind of silence that year, not the quiet of empty streets, but the quiet of questions that refused to die. It began with something small and wrong, the sort of detail that makes your stomach drop before your mind catches up a front door left ajar on a narrow terrace, a hallway light burning when it shouldn't, a home waiting for footsteps that never come. Maeve was 23, a laugh that cut clean through pub noise, a cheap ring she spun when she was thinking, a missing button on her coat she kept meaning to sew. On a Thursday night in late autumn, she walked out into town like she'd done 100 times, into the warm mouth of Temple Bar, into music and cigarette smoke and clinking glass, into that doubling glow that makes even tired faces look alive. The river Liffey carried shredded reflections. Taxis prowled for fares, buses sighed at stops. Maeve moved through it all like a normal person in a normal city. And that normality is what makes the memory poisonous, because it means it could have been anyone. Maeve was seen confirmed inside one pub, then another. A friend remembered her stepping outside for air, shoulders lifted against the cold, hair catching the light for a second before she vanished into the crowd. Another remembered her checking her watch, a quick glance, a little frown, like she was waiting for something that was already late. There was talk of a man, not a boyfriend, not a stranger, a friend of a friend. The kind of phrase that sounds harmless until it's the last thing you'd say with confidence. No one could pin down a name. No one could describe him well. A blur in a doorway, a shadow near the bar. A presence that only becomes important after the fact, when your brain tries to rewind the night and finds blank frames. By morning, she was absence made physical. Her bed untouched, no note, no call. The landline rang until the ringing itself felt accusatory. At first, friends tried to keep it normal. She crashed somewhere, she show up. But hours thickened, and normal snapped. Her sister filed a report. Her mother's hands wouldn't stop trembling. The guard eye wrote down the name, the date, the clothing description, as if ink could pin a person to the page and keep them from slipping away. The first questions came fast, blunt, familiar. What was she wearing? Who was she with? Was she drinking? Any drugs? Any reason she'd leave? The answers were shards. A dark coat, a scarf, a laugh, a half-finished pint, a goodbye no one remembers hearing. The first searches were hopeful, because hope is cheap before the bill arrives. They walked the likely route home. They leaned into alleys and called her name. They asked bouncers, taxi drivers, chip shop staff, anyone who might have seen a face pass under a street lamp at the wrong second. The river gave nothing. Posters appeared like a rash across the city. Grainy photos. Bold letters. Missing. A number. A plea. Marev's smile stared out from bus shelters and shop windows. A polite accusation under peeling tape. People phoned in sightings, because people cannot bear a blank space. O'Connell Street, by the canal, near the quays. Each call came with certainty in the voice, and fog in the details. A girl like her, a coat like hers, a walk like hers, always like, never is. Then the case shifted quietly, coldly when a neighbor remembered an engine outside the terrace after 2 a.m. Not a quick drop-off, not a delivery. An idling car, patient, steady, like someone waiting for a curtain to move. Another neighbor remembered headlights snapping off too suddenly, the street dropping into darkness as if someone wanted to disappear in place. It sounded like nothing. It felt like something. Detectives wrote it down anyway, because in missing person cases, nothing is where the monster hides best. They pulled Marev's circle apart. A former boyfriend with anger in his history and gaps in his night. A co-worker too attentive, too eager to drive around and help alone. A regular at the pub whose eyes lingered too long, whose smile never reached his face. Alibis were taken, checked, rechecked, then checked again with new questions. Some men were cleared. Some weren't cleared so much as set aside. Like knives returned to a drawer because no blood was visible on the blade. Weeks dragged into months. The posters curled at the corners, rain softened, sun faded, her face bleaching into ghost. Public attention shifted, but Mlev's family didn't shift. They lived inside the missing space, measuring time in unanswered calls and untouched rooms, in the keys still hanging by the door, because taking them down felt like admitting she wasn't coming back. And then the river spoke in the worst possible language, objects. A fisherman downriver snags something near a bend where the Liffey slows and collects what the city throws away. Garter boots sank into mud. Flashlights cut through drizzle. What surfaced wasn't a body. It was a handbag waterlogged, scuffed, battered as if it had scraped stone. Inside were small, brutal proofs, Mlev's identification, a set of keys, a lipstick snapped clean in half, like a bone. Not enough to answer anything, enough to turn missing into taken. Divers went in, cold water, hands searching blind through silt and broken glass and old rubbish that felt suddenly intimate. The river gave nothing else. It held the rest behind its dark surface and flowed on, calm as ever, as if it hadn't just swallowed the center of a family's life. After the handbag, the investigation hardened. Detectives stopped asking where Maeve might be and started asking who might have her, who might have wanted her silence. They listened to answering machine tapes, cheap cassettes that carried fossil fragments of her voice. They pulled phone records, traced calls, chased patterns. One detail glowed wrong. A short call late in the night from a payphone in the city centre, a call that didn't fit Mlev's habits. The payphone became a magnet for imagination. People tried to picture her there, knuckles white on the receiver, choosing her words carefully. Others pictured someone else making the call, staging it, planting confusion like a thumbprint on glass. Fingerprints came back as a smear of humanity. Payphones belonged to everyone. Evidence that belonged to everyone belonged to no one. Rumors swelled where facts wouldn't settle. A dark two-door car, a man in a cap, a raised voice near a taxi rank. A scream near the canal, maybe a scream, maybe a gull, maybe a drunk. A taxi driver who thought he saw her walking fast, head down, but couldn't swear to the face. Each story made the city feel busy, involved, helpful. Each story also made the city feel hunted, because if Maeve could vanish in the glow of a crowded night, then so could anyone. The headlines sharpened, missing woman feared dead, community in shock, cold case looms. The language was loud, a drumbeat that turned fear into routine. Parents tightened rules, friends walked each other home, people stared at strangers longer than they should. Dublin, a city built on familiarity, began to suspect its own shadows. That is what an unsolved disappearance does. It doesn't just terrify, it accuses. It suggests the answer might live next door, might buy bread where you buy bread, might laugh in the same pub where Maeve laughed, and the city would never know until it was too late. On the first anniversary, cameras returned, hungry for closure they wouldn't get. The Gardaí released a composite sketch from a witness at a taxi rank, a man in his 30s, sharp nose, heavy brows, the kind of face you could paste onto half the city. They asked for information. They asked for courage. They asked, without saying it, for someone's guilt to crack. Mlev's mother stood at microphones and tried to keep her voice steady. It broke anyway. Her sister stared into the lens like she was staring at the person who did this. They said Maeve wouldn't just vanish like a coin dropped into water. They said someone knew something. They said the truth was out there, breathing, walking, living a normal life. Years passed, detectives moved on or retired. New detectives inherited the file like a curse, thick with statements, rumors, dead ends. Techniques improved, databases grew, evidence was re-examined. The handbag, the keys, the snapped lipstick tested and retested, as if science could coax a name out of silence. Nothing rose clean enough to hold. No body, no trial, no confession, no ending. And then, much later, a word appeared in print that made people sit up like they'd heard a shot. Closed. Dublin 1994 cold case closed. Closed with no arrest announced. Closed with no suspect marched into court. closed with language like credible information and no further viable lines of inquiry, as if paperwork could mimic justice. The city tasted that word and recoiled. Marev's family refused it, because closed implies closure, and closure implies peace, and peace requires an answer stand on without sinking. What does it mean when a case is closed without a body, without a name? It means the machinery has decided to stop turning. It means the burden shifts to memory, to whispers, to the stubborn weight of a question that won't stay down. Somewhere in Dublin, someone read that headline and felt something sharp and private in their chest relief, or fear, or the sudden tightening of a throat that knows exactly how much the river can hold and still look calm on the surface. The word close didn't arrive like a door clicking shut. It arrived like a file sliding into a drawer with a soft thud that felt louder than it had any right to be, because the drawer wasn't in a station. It was in the city's head, and Dublin hated the idea that paper could end what flesh and blood hadn't. In the weeks that followed, the questions didn't fade, they sharpened, because when the official engine stops, every private engine revs harder, and suddenly the streets were full of small, angry detectives, bartenders remembering faces, taxi drivers replaying routes, old friends counting the seconds between sightings as if time itself could be interrogated. It was then that the older details, the ones that had gone soft with repetition, started to feel different, like someone had turned the lighting harsh and made the same room look like a crime scene. A quiet clerk at a bank remembered something that hadn't sounded like anything at the time. A young woman, rain on her coat, coming in the next day to ask about a card that wasn't working, voice polite, eyes to alert. It wasn't Maeve, at least the clerk couldn't swear it was, but the date lined up, and the question landed like a stone. Marev's accounts hadn't moved after she disappeared. No withdrawal, no purchase, no signature, nothing that said alive and spending. That should have been comforting, except it wasn't. No activity means no trace, and no trace is either careful planning or absolute finality. Detectives kept the detail in the file anyway, because even a maybe is a doorway when you're trapped inside a locked room. They mapped her night like a battlefield, pub to pub, street to street, minute to minute, with the kind of precision that looks noble on paper and feels sick in the body. The city centre in 1994 was not the city centre that would come later, slicker and brighter. It was rough around the edges, a little looser, a little darker, a place where you could drift from warmth into shadow in 3 steps. There were fewer cameras, fewer digital footprints, fewer ways to prove where a person had been. And that absence back then was normal. Now it reads like opportunity. At the heart of it sat the taxi rank. Not a dramatic alley, not a lonely bridge. A taxi rank, bright with headlights and impatience, where people shout destinations and slam doors and nobody listens closely, because everyone assumes everyone else is fine. It was there, near that churn of engines and voices, that to statements refused to agree. One witness said she saw Maeve get into a car that wasn't a taxi, a low vehicle with the wrong kind of quiet. Another insisted Maeve argued with a man by the taxis, not loud, not theatrical tight, urgent, words swallowed by traffic then turned away as if she'd decided something. One story pointed to abduction, the other pointed to choice. The gulf between them was the size of the whole case. The guard eye leaned hard into the men they could name. A former boyfriend who'd once punched a wall beside Marev's head, leaving plaster dust in her hair like snow. A co-worker whose kindness felt staged, who brought sandwiches to the search and insisted on driving the family home, always alone with someone in the passenger seat. A barman who'd watched her too closely. The kind of man who collects secrets the way other people collect coins. Each of them was pulled into fluorescent rooms and asked the same questions in different orders, because liars learn scripts, and scripts crack when the lines change. Nothing cracked. What did crack was the city's patience. Tips began to arrive with a new flavor spite. Accusations made by exes, by rivals, by neighbors who hated each other long before Maeve vanished. People phoned in names like they were throwing stones through windows, and detectives had to chase each one, because the one time you ignore a tip is the one time it's true. Files thickened, sleep thinned, the case grew heavy, not with answers, but with weight, the dead weight of possibility. Then came the letter. It arrived without a return address, paper cheap, ink pressed hard enough to scar the page. Not a confession, not a direct admission, but something worse, detail, a reference to Mev's ring, the one she spun when she was thinking. A note about her scarf, how it smelled like smoke, a line that read like a dare, "You're looking in the wrong water." Detectives treated it like a live wire. They bagged it, they dusted it. They tested the saliva under the stamp. In 1994, the science was blunt. They could tell it was a man, maybe, and not much else. The letter became an object of obsession, passed between gloved hands like a relic, because it suggested a living mind behind the silence, someone watching the search and enjoying the helplessness of it. But letters lie. Letters can be written by anyone who wants to feel important. Still, the phrase burrowed into Dublin, wrong water. People began to stare at canals, at docks, at drains, at the river itself, as if Maeve might be hidden in plain sight under a skin of dark. A year later, a construction worker found a scarf in a skip dark fabric, frayed edge, a faint smell of damp, and, for a week, the city held its breath. Families whispered prayers they didn't know they still believed in. The scarf went to the lab. It wasn't Marev's. Breath released. Grief returned, angrier for having been interrupted, and somewhere in all those false alarms, another truth hardened. The case wasn't just missing, it was being erased. Evidence decays, witnesses move, memories rot at the edges, pubs repaint, streets change names. A face seen for 2 seconds becomes a face you can't summon at all. Time doesn't merely pass in a cold case, time works against you, second suspect. By the late 90s, the file was a monster. A senior detective, one of the last, who'd been there at the beginning, kept it on his shelf like a personal wound. He'd open it after hours and stare at the photos, at the map, at the handwritten witness statements that smelled faintly of old coffee. He began to circle patterns that weren't patterns, because that's what humans do when they cannot accept randomness. He looked at other disappearances, other assaults, other women who'd been followed from pubs to streets. He cross-referenced, he called other districts. He asked about a man who'd once been questioned in a separate case, a man with a calm voice, no fixed address, a history of drifting jobs, a history of being near trouble but never inside it. The man had died in a car accident in '97. With him died 1,000 questions, and detectives hate the dead because the dead cannot be cornered. And then, years later, technology kicked the door of the past. It was the early 2000s when a younger detective, new haircut, new methods, none of the old sentimental ties, reopened the evidence with fresh eyes. He didn't have the benefit of memory, he had the benefit of distance. He looked at the letter again, not as a taunt, but as a biological object. He looked at the handbag again, not as a symbol, but as a container. New tests pulled more from old fibers, partial profiles, weak signals, the kind of science that doesn't say this is the person, but says this might be a thread. The results didn't produce a name. They produced a category: unknown male, unknown contact, unknown place in Marev's last hours. It wasn't closure. It was a cough from the grave. The detective went hunting in places the original team hadn't. He started with the ordinary: charity shops, pawn counters, lost property boxes, the places where the city's abandoned objects go to be absorbed. Because something nagged at him, Marev's last known hours were full of people, full of noise, full of debris, and debris is where truth sometimes hides. He visited the storage rooms of a lost property office that smelled of mildew and forgotten umbrellas. He looked through bags and scarves and cheap jewelry, because for every item returned, 10 are never claimed, and those 10 belong to stories nobody ever hears. And then he found the camera, a disposable film camera, the kind tourists used, the kind students bought for a night out. It was sealed in a plastic bag, tagged with a date. The weekend May vanished. It had been turned in months after her disappearance, found under a bus seat, overlooked, filed away. At the time, it meant nothing. Now it meant maybe everything. The detective held it like a heartbeat. He sent it to be developed. When the prints came back, they were a smear of flash and movement, friends laughing too hard, faces overexposed, hands in the air. But in one frame, caught at the edge, almost out of shot, was Maeve, not posed, not smiling at the lens, just present, half-turned, mid-step, scarf loose at her throat, and behind her, closer than comfort, was a man whose face was mostly shadow, except for the glint of an eye and the hard line of a jaw. The photo wasn't proof of anything. It was proof of proximity. It was proof that someone had been close enough to be captured by accident. And accidents are the closest thing to truth a case like this ever gets. The community reacted the way communities always do when a ghost is given a new shape. The phone lines lit up. People squinted at the man's outline and saw someone they knew. That's my cousin. That's the lad from the chipper. That's the fella who used to hang around the pool hall. Everyone wanted the face to be familiar because familiarity makes evil manageable. If you can name it, you can cage it. The detective tried. He circulated the image. He went back to the pubs, now renovated, now brighter, now pretending the 90s never happened. He showed it to older staff, to men who'd been young then, and were thick around the waist now. Eyes narrowed as they searched their memory like a pocket for change. Some shook their heads, some hesitated. One man, a retired bouncer, went pale and said the shadow looked like someone who used to bring girls around, someone who'd bragged about being good with secrets, someone who'd vanished from the scene long after Maeve did. A nickname surfaced, not a legal name. A street name, slippery and common, the kind of label that could belong to a dozen men. Fox. The search for Fox burned months. It led to dead addresses, disconnected numbers, old acquaintances who suddenly couldn't remember anything. It led to a man in England who wasn't the right man. It led to a grave in Wicklow that held someone else entirely. The nickname refused to become a person, and yet the photo changed something irreversible in the case. It shifted Maeve from a missing name or a poster into a moment you could see, a second frozen in flash, a man behind her like a threat you didn't notice until it was too late. The city could no longer pretend it was all mist and maybe. It had an image now, a shadow you could stare at until your eyes watered. When the guard eye later used the word closed, some believed it meant they'd found Fox and lost him, or found him and couldn't prove it, or found something ugly or something that didn't fit a courtroom. Others believed the opposite, that they'd closed it because the machinery was tired, because budgets have limits, because new cases scream louder than old ones whisper. The truth, whatever it is, sat somewhere between those beliefs, heavy and unspoken. Marev's mother kept the developed photo in a frame by the kettle, not because it was comforting, but because it was real. Every time she boiled water, she looked at her daughter's face caught in the glare of a night that never ended, and behind that face, she looked at the man-shaped darkness that had stolen the rest of her life. And she wondered, like Dublin wondered, how close that darkness had been to everyone. How many times it had brushed past in a doorway. How many nights it had stood in the glow of streetlights and walked away clean. The photograph didn't just add a face to the darkness, it added weight to every ordinary corner of the city. Because once you've seen a shadow standing too close behind someone you love, you start noticing shadows everywhere. And Dublin, busy, loud, stubborn Dublin, began to move like a place, trying not to make noise. People talked about Fox the way sailors talk about storms, not as a person, but as a pattern, something that rolls in when the air is right and vanishes when you turn your back. And the worst part was how quickly the nickname became a substitute for knowledge, a little word that let everyone pretend the monster had a neat outline, even when the outline refused to hold. The detective with the photo kept the print in a clear sleeve, the edges already softening from being handled too many times, and he carried it like a warrant, like an accusation. From pub basements to back offices, from taxi depots to dole queues, leaning it toward faces that were older now, faces that had survived the 90s by forgetting what they'd seen. He learned fast that memory is loyal only to comfort. People remembered laughs and songs and football scores. They remembered who owed them money. They remembered who'd insulted them. But ask them about the stranger who hovered too close behind a young woman on a wet Thursday night in 1994, and their eyes slid away, not always out of malice, sometimes out of fear, sometimes out of fatigue, sometimes because the truth was tied to their own mistakes, and they didn't want to pull that thread. Then one afternoon, a call came in that didn't sound like the others, not excited, not performative, controlled, a woman's voice, measured to the point of shaking, asked for the detective by name. She didn't want to give her full details over the line. She didn't want to meet at the station. She suggested a cafe near the quays at a time when the lunch crowd would be thick enough to drown a conversation. The detective agreed, because when a tip comes wrapped in caution, it's either worthless or dangerous, and dangerous is what moved the needle. She arrived with a folder tucked under her arm like it was a shield. Late 30s, perhaps. Tired eyes, the kind that have watched too much and slept too little. She sat with her back to the wall. Her hands didn't stop moving, stirring coffee that didn't need stirring, smoothing paper that was already flat. She didn't look like someone who wanted attention. She looked like someone who wanted absolution. I knew him, she said. Not loud enough for the next table to hear. Not as Fox. I knew the real name. I knew where he drank. I knew where he slept when he had nowhere. I knew what kind of smile he used on girls who thought they were safe because there were people around. The detective didn't react the way his adrenaline wanted him to. He kept his voice low. He asked for the name. She hesitated, swallowed, then said it. A common enough Irish name that meant nothing to anyone outside the room. A man who could be anywhere. A man who could be no one. But she added details that sharpened it. A crooked tooth, a scar along the scalp hidden by hair, a left hand that shook when he was sober. She said he used to hang around taxi ranks, not because he needed taxis, but because taxi ranks are hunting grounds in plain sight, full of strangers who don't belong to each other. She said he liked the moment at the end of the night when friendships loosen and people split off, when someone says, "I'm grand, I'll be fine," and means it because the street is bright and the city is familiar. And that's when he'd move soft, quick, smiling, offering help like a coin with a sharp edge. The detective slid the photo across the table. Is it him? The woman's eyes went to the shadow behind Maeve. She stared so long the detective wondered if she'd bolt. Then she nodded, once, small and brutal. "That's him," she whispered, "or close enough that I can't pretend it isn't." The detective asked why she was coming forward now, after all these years. The answer came out like something pulled from her throat. "Because he's dead," she said. "And because I'm tired of waking up with his laughter in my ears." Dead. The word hit like a cold splash. Dead suspects are convenient and infuriating. Convenient because they can't sue you for defamation. Infuriating because they can't be pressured, tested, broken. Dead men don't slip. They don't confess. They don't make mistakes you can catch on tape. They just become stories, and stories don't go to prison. But the woman didn't come empty-handed. She opened her folder and slid out copies of old paperwork, rental agreements, employment slips, a scrawled address book page she'd kept like a splinter. She'd been close enough to him once to know where he'd stayed in '94, close enough to know his routines, close enough to know he'd vanished for a stretch after Maeve disappeared, showing up with bruised knuckles and a new watch he couldn't explain. She said he'd joked about a girl who wouldn't stop crying. She said he'd spoken about the river like it was a friend. She said she'd hated herself for listening and doing nothing. The detective felt the case shift under his feet, not solved, not clean, but tilted toward something that could be grabbed. He asked for the address from 1994. She gave it. A bedsit above a closed-down shop off a narrow lane, one of those places the city swallows without leaving a trace. He asked for the man's date of death. She gave it. Early 2001. Overdose, officially. Found alone, no family, no ceremony. Buried under a marker with the wrong spelling. Dublin has always been good at losing people twice. That night the detective went back to the file, to the old witness statements that mentioned a low car, wrong kind of quiet, and he laid the woman's details over them missing paper. He saw intersections where before there had only been mess. A taxi driver in '94 had mentioned a man with a shaking hand. A barmaid had mentioned a scar along the scalp. A witness had described a smile that looked practiced, as if he'd rehearsed it in mirrors. The old team had chased those details, but the city had been too wide and the suspect too slippery. Now, years later, the outline began to look less like rumour and more like a person who'd moved through the cracks. The Gardaí did what they could do against a dead man. They pulled records. They confirmed he'd been in Dublin in 1994. They confirmed he'd been questioned briefly in connection with an assault that never went to court. A girl who'd refused to testify after she was threatened in a way nobody could prove. They confirmed he'd worked odd jobs near the quays, near water, near places where you can dispose of things without being seen. They confirmed he'd owned, at one point, a low vehicle that matched a witness description. They confirmed, in the cold language of paperwork, that the shadow in the photograph might not be a ghost after all. But might doesn't convict. Might doesn't tell a mother where to bring flowers. Might doesn't put a body in a coffin. So the detective went for what time hadn't erased. Places. He walked the lane where the bedsit had been. The shop below was different now. Another business. Another sign. Another smell. The stairs were the same. Old wood. Narrow. The kind that creaks under secrets. He stood at the top and looked down, trying to imagine Maeve here if she'd been brought here, coerced, tricked, carried. He tried to imagine her voice in that stairwell. He tried not to. Imagination is a kind of violence when you can't stop. They got permission to search what remained, though years had rewritten it. The bedsit had been renovated twice, repainted, replumbed, the past covered in white and laminate. Still, forensic teams came in with lights and swabs, hunting the impossible. They pulled up floorboards, they scraped at cracks, they took samples from the underside of old fixtures that had survived modernization by accident. It felt absurd, this careful science on a room that had hosted 1,000 anonymous lives since 1994, but detectives know absurdity is sometimes the only door left. The lab results came back like whispers, nothing conclusive. Too much contamination, too many ghosts. But one fragment from an old pipe cavity, it a partial profile that didn't match the current tenant, didn't match anyone in the building's recent history, and when compared against what they still had from Rev's handbag sat uncomfortably close. Not enough for court. Enough to make the room go quiet. News of the dead suspect leaked, the way it always does, as if secrets can't survive Dublin's appetite for story. Suddenly, the city had a name to wrap around Fox, and it spread through pubs like smoke. People repeated it with the certainty of those who'd never sat in an interview room and listened to the law explain why certainty isn't evidence. Some said they'd always known. Some said they'd seen him that night. Some said they'd shared a pint with him and felt something wrong but ignored it. The city's collective memory rearranged itself to make room for the new villain, because it's easier to believe you were almost wise than to admit you were blind. Marev's family was offered a meeting, a quiet room. A detective across the table with the careful eyes of a man delivering damage. He explained what they had: a photograph, a witness, a name, a dead man, a handful of weak forensic signals that pointed in a direction but didn't arrive at a destination. He explained what they didn't have. Maeve. He avoided the word body until her mother said it first, and when she did, the syllables sounded like glass breaking. "Are you telling me you know who did it?" her sister asked. "I'm telling you," the detective said. "We have strong information that a particular individual was involved, and that he is no longer alive. "And Maeve," the mother said, voice thin. "Where is Maeve?" The detective didn't have a place. He had theories: the river, the canals, a burial site in the hills, a storage unit, a house outside the city. The kind of list that makes you want to scream, because it's not a list of answers. It's a list of places to keep dying. Still, that meeting, those words were what gave the institution permission to use the term closed. Not closed as in solved, not closed as in justice delivered, but closed as in no longer active, no longer chasing, no longer burning resources in a forest of maybe. From a bureaucratic view, it made sense. From a human view, it was obscene, because the moment the file was declared closed, the city's nightmares didn't stop, and that question led to water again, because Dublin is a city with water in its bones, water that divides and carries and hides. And in late winter, when the rain came hard and the river swelled, a maintenance crew down by a neglected stretch of canal found something caught in reeds, something pale, something small, something that looked like it didn't belong to the earth at all. They called it in. Garter tape went up. Flashing lights painted the wet air. People gathered on bridges as if watching would pull the truth to the surface. It wasn't Maeve, not enough to tell. Bone fragments, old, scattered, impossible to date on sight. The kind of discovery that reopens every wound at once, because it could be her, could be someone else, could be another story entirely. They sent it to the lab. They waited. And waiting, in a case like this, is its own form of punishment, because the city can keep moving, the pubs can keep filling, the laughter can keep rolling out into the night. But for Mav's family, every day still ends the same way, with a streetlight outside an empty room, with a photograph by the kettle, with the shadow behind her frozen forever, close enough to touch, and still after all the years untouchable. The bone fragments sat in a small plastic tray under bright lab lights, pale as chalk, and for the first time in years Dublin went quiet in that particular way it only does when it senses the past has lifted its head again, because the canal isn't a rumour, it's a real strip of water that runs through real neighbourhoods, and people walked past it every day without thinking about what it could hide until the reeds coughed up something that looked like evidence. The forensic techs didn't look at the crowd outside the tape. They looked at the fragments the way you look at a sentence that might end a story, measuring, photographing, cataloguing, every movement careful, because if this was Maeve, then the city had been stepping around her for decades, and if it wasn't, then the city had just discovered another ghost and the nightmare had multiplied. The waiting that followed wasn't passive. It was a kind of fever. In pubs people spoke lower, as if the dead could hear. On buses strangers watched each other, the way you watch for smoke when you've heard there might be a fire. Marev's mother stopped making tea because the kettle whistle sounded like a siren now. Her sister slept with the phone on her pillow, like a child guarding a secret, because if the call came and she missed it, she'd never forgive herself. The detective who'd brought Fox into the light went back to the file anyway, because hope has a cruel trick. It doesn't soothe. It demands more. He reopened the timeline until the pages looked worn at the edges. He stared at the payphone call again, the one that had always felt wrong. He took the old phone records and laid them against the dead suspect's known addresses, his known haunts, his known movement. He noticed a detail the first team had mentioned, but never elevated. The payphone wasn't just in the city centre. It was near a stop where late-night buses would load up with the drunk and the tired, near a stretch of pavement where you could watch who was alone and who wasn't. And he pictured the dead man Fox, whatever his real name, had been standing there, hand steady on the receiver, voice low, making a call that wasn't meant to be heard, just meant to exist, a breadcrumb placed on purpose. He went further. He dug into what had been dismissed as background noise in '94. A series of petty thefts around the same pubs Maeve had visited. Wallets lifted, handbags snatched. Nothing that would normally cross a detective's desk next to a missing person file, except one theft report mentioned a man who'd offered help afterward, smiled to wide. As if he'd been waiting for it. The description was thin. The timing wasn't. The detective circled it in red, and the ink bled slightly into the paper, like the past refusing to stay contained. He talked to an older taxi driver, who'd once given a statement and regretted it ever since. The man met him in a depot that smelled of petrol and tea, eyes narrowed like he was about to be accused of something. The detective showed him the photograph again. The driver stared, jaw working. "That's not a taxi," he muttered, pointing to the edge of the frame where a blur of metal could be seen. "That's a private car. Low, two-door, dark. Seen it that night. Parked too close to the rank like it owned the place." He paused, and the silence stretched, thick with all the years he'd swallowed his own doubt. "I told them back then," he said. "They asked for the reg, like I had a camera in me head." "What else?" the detective asked. The driver's eyes flicked away, then back, as if checking the walls. "There was a woman," he said. "Not Maeve, another one, crying. She got in a cab, shaking. Said a fella had grabbed her arm, tried to steer her away. She got free. She said he laughed when she pulled away. Like it was a game." The driver swallowed hard. "I never reported that. Thought it was just Dublin. Thought it was just another night. Another night." That phrase did more damage than any confession, because it was a reminder that predators thrive in normalization. They hide inside what people are willing to shrug at. The detective tracked the woman down through old depot logs, through scribbled names and half-legible notes. It took weeks. When he finally reached her, she didn't want to meet. She didn't want to remember. She'd built a life like a wall, and the past was a hammer. But eventually, she agreed to a phone call, voice flat, brittle. She remembered the hand on her arm. She remembered the smell of cigarettes and damp wool. She remembered a ring on his finger with a small notch in it, as if it had been struck by something hard. She remembered his words, quiet and mocking. "Don't make a scene." She remembered looking back at the rank and seeing another young woman alone, and wanting to shout, and not shouting. Because fear is selfish when it hits fast. The notch in the ring made the detective's mind snap to Maev's ring, the one she spun when she thought. The letter had mentioned it. The writer had known it. If the dead suspect wore a ring with a notch, it might have been a trophy, or it might have been something he picked up by accident and never let go. Either way, it was a thread, and the detective yanked hard. He went hunting through property records, storage unit registries, anything that might list personal effects from the dead man's overdose in 2001. There was a small inventory from a hostel locker emptied after his death. A few clothes, a battered wallet, a cheap watch, and one ring, described as women's, silver-toned, with no further detail, because to the staff it was just junk, and junk gets thrown out. The ring wasn't in evidence. It hadn't been kept. It had been lost in the administrative churn, the way Maeve had been lost in the crowd. When he told Rev's sister, she didn't cry. She laughed once, sharp and broken. "So he kept her," she said, voice shaking with rage. "He kept pieces, and the system threw them away." The lab results on the bone fragments arrived like a verdict without a judge. They weren't Rev's. They belonged to an older individual, male, likely decades in the ground, possibly historic remains disturbed by erosion and dredging. It should have been relief, because it meant Maeve wasn't there, rotting under reeds. Instead it was a fresh punch, because it meant the canal had teased the city with a body, and then handed it a stranger, proving again that water returns what it wants, not what you need. And yet the discovery did something else. It forced the guard eye to look at the canal differently, not as a pretty ribbon through the city, but as a corridor, a place you can access at night, a place you can step down to from quiet paths, a place you can dump, and the current will do the rest. The detective pushed for a targeted search sections near where the dead suspect had worked, near where he'd lived, near where he might have moved without being seen. Resources were limited. The case was closed, but pressure is a lever, and Maev's family had learned how to apply it. They went public again. Not softly, not politely. Cameras returned. Marev's mother stood in wind that whipped her hair around her face and held the photograph up like a weapon. She spoke with a fury that made the reporters flinch. "Don't tell us it's closed," she said. "Closed is 4 doors. Closed is 4 shops. Closed is 4 books. My daughter is not a book you can put on a shelf." The words landed. Politicians made sympathetic noises. The Gardaí made careful statements. And behind the careful statements, a small team went back to water with magnets and sonar and gloved hands, dragging the canal like a net through history. They pulled up bicycles, shopping trolleys, rusted tools, broken pipes, the debris of a city that treats water like a bean. Every clank against metal made the team's hearts jump. Every bag lifted from black water made someone hold their breath. Nothing that looked like Maeve. But absence, in a search like this, isn't clean. It suggests movement. It suggests planning. It suggests that if Maeve had been disposed of in water, it might not have been the canal at all, or it might have been a stretch they hadn't touched, or it might have been the sea. The detective's mind kept circling the letter, wrong water. It sounded taunting. It sounded like someone who knew the searchers were staring at the Liffey, while the truth lay somewhere else, somewhere that didn't flash in tourist photos. The coast. In 1994, Fox had done odd jobs near the docks, moving crates, sweeping yards, the kind of work that leaves you invisible. The detective pulled port records as best he could, old manifests and shift lists, most of them incomplete. He learned that around the time Maeve vanished, a small freight operation had been running late-night loads from Dublin to smaller coastal points, Wicklow, Arklow, places where boats come and go without fanfare. If you wanted to move something heavy without being seen, you didn't need a grand scheme. You needed a van, a dock gate, and a man no one cared enough to watch. He tracked down an old dock supervisor, now living in a quiet estate with a garden to neat for the kind of life he'd once led. The man answered the door slowly, suspicion baked into his expression. The detective didn't say Marev's name at first. He mentioned 1994. He mentioned a drifter with a scar and a shaking left hand. The supervisor's face tightened, like a knot pulled to heart. "I remember him," the supervisor said after a long pause, voice careful. "Not because he was special. Because he was off, always hanging around, always looking like he was waiting for someone to slip." "Did he have access to vehicles?" the detective asked. "Everyone had access," the supervisor replied. "It's docks. Vans, forklifts, keys in pockets, gates open half the time, because nobody expects trouble. And that's the point, isn't it?" He looked past the detective's shoulder, as if expecting something to appear. "There was a night," he said quietly, "where he showed up late, not scheduled. Said he was helping a mate. He had a tarp in the back of a van. I asked what for. He said, 'Fish.'" The supervisor's mouth twisted. "It was November. No fish. Not like that. Did you report it?" The supervisor didn't answer immediately. When he did, it was almost inaudible. "You didn't report things then," he said. "You just wanted your shift to end." That was how the city had fed its own monster. 1,000 small moments unreported, because everyone wanted to go home. The detective left with a new map drawn in his mind: docks, vans, coastal roads, quiet slipways. He drove those roads at night, not because it would produce evidence, but because he needed to feel the geography the way Fox might have felt it. A series of exits, a series of dark places where headlights could disappear. He passed laybys overlooking Blackwater. He passed fields where fog lay low like breath. He passed small harbours where boats creaked against ropes, a sound like teeth grinding. In one harbour he found an old man mending nets who remembered a rumour from back then, a rumour he'd laughed off until the detective said Marev's name, and the laughter died. There was talk, the fisherman said, hands never stopping their work, about a man bringing something heavy down to the slip, late, no lights, just the sea doing its own noise. People said it was contraband. People always say that. He looked up, ice pale and cold. Maybe it was worse. Rumour, again, always rumor. But rumors are the footprints of truth when truth refuses to stand still. Back in Dublin, the file grew another appendage, another set of papers, another set of places to check. And with every new lead, the same brutal reality remained. The suspect was dead, the evidence was thin, and the official system had already decided to stop. That was the pressure cooker. That was the reason the word closed felt like a slap, because every step forward had to be wrestled from indifference, every search justified, every hour explained, every resource begged for, while Mev's family lived inside a sentence that never ended. One night, years after the photograph resurfaced, Mev's sister received a message through a mutual friend short, anonymous, sent from a number that didn't accept calls. Just a few words: stop digging, you'll regret it. It wasn't proof. It wasn't even clever, but it was fresh, and freshness is radioactive in a cold case. It suggested someone was still watching, or it suggested someone wanted them to believe that. The detective traced the number, prepaid, bought with cash. No CCTV at the shop. The kind of message that exists only to poison your sleep. Mev's mother insisted on keeping the curtains open after that, as if darkness was what predators used, and if she could flood the house with light, she could keep her daughter safer, even now, even in absence. Mev's sister started carrying her keys between her knuckles when she walked at night, a habit learned too late and practiced often. Friends who had once laughed in Temple Bar now flinched at footsteps behind them, as if the city itself had developed a permanent reflex. And somewhere, under the hum of present-day Dublin, the year 1994 kept ticking like a bomb that never finished exploding. Because the case being closed didn't mean the story ended. It meant the story escaped the boundaries of the file and leaked into everything, into the water, into the streets, into the way strangers looked at each other in doorways, into the way a photograph could still make a whole city taste fear, because Mev's face in that flash was still young, still caught mid-step, and the shadow behind her was still close enough to touch, still anonymous enough to be anyone. And that is the most terrifying kind of monster, not the one you can point to, but the one that can live 4 years inside the word maybe. The message sat on Mev's sister's phone like a bruise that wouldn't fade. Stop digging, you'll regret it. And the worst part was how quickly it infected everything ordinary. How a kettle click sounded like a lock turning. How a footstep in the stairwell made her heart slam as if the past had climbed the stairs behind her. Because threats don't need to be sophisticated. They only need to arrive at the right address. She showed it to the detective in the same cafe where the first witness had whispered a dead man's name. And the detective didn't flinch. He just turned the phone in his hand and stared at the numbers like he could squeeze a fingerprint out of them by force of will. Then he handed it back and said, quietly, "This is either someone who knows something or someone who wants you to stop believing that you can know anything." And both possibilities tasted like bile. He tried the technical angles anyway, because detectives survive by refusing to admit the world is too large. The prepaid phone had been topped up with cash. The point-of-sale camera had been broken 4 months. The shopkeeper remembered nothing except that it was busy and raining and people always pay cash when they don't want to be remembered. The signal pinged off a mast that covered half the city. Dublin's modern convenience, the invisible web of coverage, became useless at the exact moment it mattered, because in a city this size, a shadow can hide inside a crowd and still feel alone. So the detective went backward instead of forward. He asked himself what kind of person sends a threat like that after a case has been labeled closed, after the suspect is dead, after the official machine has already walked away. Not a thrill seeker, not a random crank. The timing was too pointed, the words too direct. It felt like damage control. It felt like someone who believed that if the family kept digging, the wrong thing would surface, and if the wrong thing surfaced, it wouldn't just stain a dead drifter's memory, it would stain living people. That thought changed the air in the room, because living people mean leverage, and leverage means motive. He reopened Fox's social orbit like a wound. The woman who'd identified him in the photograph had said he didn't operate alone in life. drifters rarely do. They cling to networks of small-time men, men who trade favors, men who share cigarettes and alibis and secrets, men who know how to vanish into each other. The detective pulled the names of anyone who'd shared addresses, hostels, work sites. He mapped them like infection clusters. He saw patterns in the ugliness, the same to pubs, the same stretch near the rank, the same cheap lodgings where you can disappear without anyone asking why. One name kept resurfacing on the edges, never central, always present. A man who'd done security work around clubs. A man who'd later moved into private work, the kind you don't advertise. A man with a clean haircut and a respectable facade, the type that gets waved past doors. In 1994 he'd been 28, maybe 29. In 2025 he'd be in his late 50s, a man with silver at the temples and a life built on being unremarkable. The detective hated how plausible that was, hated how easy it is to become invisible if you live long enough without being caught. He brought the name to his supervisor. The supervisor listened, expression set in stone, then said the sentence that kills more investigations than any lie. We have nothing that would stand up. The detective argued. He pushed. He pointed to the threat message. He pointed to the photograph. He pointed to the woman's statement. He pointed to the history of intimidation around the earlier assault case, the girl who'd refused to testify. The supervisor sighed like a man carrying a budget in his chest and said, "You can talk to him. You can't harass him. And if this turns into a witch hunt, it's your neck." So the detective did what he could. He went to the man's workplace, a bland office building where security wore uniforms and smiles, and asked for him by name. When the man appeared, he looked like every middle-aged Dublin professional, calm eyes, practiced politeness, the posture of someone who has learned how to take up space without appearing to. The detective introduced himself, kept his tone neutral, and watched the man's face as he mentioned 1994. There was a flicker, not fear, not guilt. Something smaller and colder recognition. "You've got the wrong person," the man said immediately, before the detective even asked a question. And that preemptive denial landed heavy, because innocent people deny too. But they usually ask why. They usually want to know what's happening. This man wanted it gone. The detective asked where he'd been on the night May vanished. The man smiled faintly and said, "That's 30 years ago. I was young. I went out. Like everyone." The detective asked if he'd known Fox. The man's smile didn't change, but his eyes hardened. "I knew plenty of lads back then," he said. Dublin's small. The detective slid the photograph across the table, not the original, a copy, and watched the man look at it for less than a second before pushing it back as if it carried heat. "That could be anyone," he said. "And you?" the detective asked. The man laughed once, very softly, like someone amused by a child's misunderstanding. "If that's what you're implying," he said, "you should be careful." Careful. The word echoed the threat message. Not the same language, not the same number, but the same sense. The detective left with nothing he could cuff, nothing he could charge, but something sharp lodged under his ribs, the certainty that the past had just looked him in the eye and dared him to prove it. 2 nights later, Mrev's mother found her front garden gate unlatched. It was a small thing, the kind of thing that happens when wind hits the latch just right, except the night was still. She didn't tell anyone at first, because she didn't want to give the fear power, but she lay awake listening to the house settle, every creak in the pipes turning into footsteps in her head. In the morning, she noticed the photograph by the kettle had been turned face down. Not smashed, not stolen, just turned over, like a hand placed gently on a mouth. The family went to the Gardaí, furious, shaking, and the Gardaí wrote it down, because they write everything down, and because writing is sometimes all the system can offer when it won't fight. A uniformed officer suggested installing cameras. Rev's sister stared at him, if he'd insulted their grief. "Cameras," she said, voice thin with rage. "We needed cameras in 1994. The detective felt the case tightening into something dangerous. Not dangerous like an action film, not loud and cinematic, dangerous like pressure in a sealed room. where one spark can blow out walls. He knew the family was being nudged, prodded, reminded that digging has consequences, and he knew intimidation works best when it feels plausible, when it could be coincidence. When the victim is left arguing with themselves in the dark, did that really happen? Am I imagining it? That kind of doubt is a weapon, and it leaves no fingerprints. He needed something that couldn't be waved away, a hard fact, a clean line from then to now. So he returned to the photograph and did what modern investigations do when memory fails. He went to faces, to pixels, to science that looks like magic until it doesn't. He sent the image to an analyst who specialized in enhancement, not the dramatic Hollywood kind, but careful, incremental work contrast shifts, grain reduction, edge sharpening. The analyst couldn't create detail that wasn't there, but sometimes you don't need detail. Sometimes you need shape, the man's jawline, the spacing of the eyes, the proportion of the nose. The analyst produced a series of clearer crops, still imperfect, still shadowed, but sharper than before, and the detective carried them like ammunition. He showed them to the woman who'd come forward in the cafe. She studied the new crops and her face tightened. "It's him," she repeated. And this time she added something she hadn't before, something she'd held back because it felt too specific, too incriminating. A phrase Fox used when he was angry. A low muttered line that sounded like a joke until you heard it twice. "Mind your manners." He'd said it to her once. Fingers tight on her wrist, he'd said it to a girl outside a club. She'd heard it in his mouth and in the mouth of another man nearby, as if it was a shared slogan. Shared language, shared habits. The way men in packs mirror each other. The detective tracked down old club staff, the ones who'd worked doors in the 90s, men who'd aged into quiet lives, and didn't want their old nights dragged into daylight. He bought coffees. He asked gentle questions. He listened more than he spoke, because people reveal more when they think they're in control. One former doorman, now driving delivery vans, admitted there had been a group 3, sometimes 4, who hung around together and had notions. Lads who thought women were scenery. Lads who treated drunkenness like permission. Fox was one, the man said, ice fixed on his cup. But he wasn't the clever one. Who was? The detective asked. The doorman shook his head slowly. "I'm not saying names," he murmured. "Not after all this time." The detective slid the enhanced crop across the table. "Do you recognize him?" The doorman looked once and went pale. The color draining so fast, it was like watching a candle die. He pushed the paper back like it burned. "You're mad," he whispered. "That lad's connected." Connected. Another word with teeth. Connected to what? To who? To the kind of people who make problems disappear. Or just connected enough in a small city that someone will throw a punch for him. The doorman stood up too fast, chair legs scraping, and left without finishing his coffee. That night the detective sat in his car outside the station and stared at the file, at the way it kept bending toward the same truth. Maeve might not have been taken by a lone drifter at all. She might have been taken by a circle, by men who moved through the nightlife like sharks, men who had each other's backs, men who could intimidate witnesses into silence and shrug off suspicion like rain. A group makes everything harder. A group shares guilt. A group buries evidence, literally or figuratively, because no one wants to be the first to break. And then, as if the city wanted to test the detective's nerves, a confession arrived cheap, loud, rotten. A man walked into a Garda station on a Monday morning, unshaven, eyes wide, smelling of old sweat and desperation, and said he knew what happened to Maeve. He said he'd been there. He said he'd helped. He said he couldn't carry it anymore. The station buzzed. People leaned in. The detective was called. He arrived to find the man trembling like a live wire, hands clasped as if praying. The man's story poured out in dramatic chunks. Maeve crying, a car, a fight, water, darkness. It hit all the right notes. It sounded like what the public imagined. It sounded like what a sensational headline would print. The detective listened, face blank, because experience teaches you that real confessions are usually messy, ashamed, inconsistent in human ways, False confessions are often cinematic. This one had too much shape. He asked details only the perpetrator would know. The man stumbled. He guessed wrong about Mrev's coat, wrong about the street, wrong about the pubs. He corrected himself too quickly, as if adjusting a script based on cues. When the detective pressed harder, the man's bravado cracked and something else spilled out. He needed money. He needed attention. He needed a reason for the chaos of his life to feel like destiny instead of failure. They charged him with wasting Garda time and sent him away. And the city's brief flare of hope collapsed into something darker than before, because nothing is crueler than a fake ending in a story that has already taken everything. But even the false confession left residue, because it reminded everyone that Mrev's name still had power, still pulled desperate people toward it like heat. And if desperate strangers were willing to exploit that, then people with real stakes, people who might be connected, would be willing to protect themselves at any cost. Mrev's sister went home that night and found an envelope under her door. No stamp, no address, just her name written in a tight hand. Inside was a photocopy of the photograph made in flash, the shadow behind, except the shadow had been circled in thick black marker. And beneath it someone had written 3 words, "Let her rest." Rest, as if the city had ever allowed her to rest. As if the family had been the ones disturbing peace, not the ones demanding truth. As if rest was something you could offer when you still haven't returned the body. She called the detective with a voice that sounded like it had been scraped raw. He came over, took the envelope with gloved hands, and the house felt too small for the anger inside it. He told her what he had to tell her, the truth that tastes like metal. "This is intimidation," he said. "It means someone is nervous." "Nervous of what?" she asked, eyes bright with tears that refused to fall. "We don't have anything." He looked at the photocopy, at the thick circle around the shadow's head, and he felt the old case breathe, slow and steady, like a creature that had never died. "Maybe you don't," he said quietly, "but they think you might." Outside, Dublin kept moving, taxis and buses and late-night laughter rolling through streets that didn't care. But inside that house, under that turned-down photograph, the past pressed close again, as close as that shadow in the frame. And for the first time in a long time, the case didn't feel closed at all. It felt awake, watchful, and impatient, like something that had been waiting decades for the right pressure point to be touched. The envelope didn't feel like paper anymore. It felt like a fingertip pressed to the pulse of the house, a quiet reminder that someone out there still cared enough to reach in and touch them. And that kind of contact is never benign. The detective drove back to the station with it sealed in an evidence bag, the photocopied circle staring through plastic like an eye, and he kept thinking about the handwriting, tight, controlled, not the scrawl of panic, not the flourish of drama handwriting that belonged to a person who had done this before. A person who knew intimidation is strongest when it looks calm. He logged it, tagged it, and watched a younger uniform slide it into a tray with the same casual motion you'd use for parking tickets. And something in him clenched, because the case had always suffered from that exact casualness, the way the world keeps treating catastrophe like paperwork. He couldn't shake the phrase "let her rest." It was framed like mercy, but mercy doesn't arrive under a door without a stamp. Mercy doesn't circle a shadow's head in thick black ink. It sounded like ownership, like permission being granted by someone who believed they had the right to grant it. And ownership meant motive that stretched beyond one dead drifter. He went back to the man he'd spoken to, the respectable security manager with the polished smile, and he didn't go as a bulldozer, because bulldozers leave tracks and tracks get you reprimanded. He went as a shadow, the same way his suspect moved. He sat in an unmarked car to streets away from the office building and watched the front door 4 hours, watching the pattern of arrivals and departures, watching who shook hands, who clapped shoulders, who looked over their own shoulder like the past had teeth. At 5:30, the man emerged, coat folded over one arm, phone to his ear, laughing at something the detective couldn't hear. And the laughter made the detective's skin crawl, because it was easy laughter, the kind you have when you believe the world can't touch you. The man drove out of town, not fast, not cautious, just steady, into a part of Dublin where houses leaned toward each other like gossip. The detective followed at a distance, 2 cars back, then 3, letting traffic hide him. The man pulled into a driveway and disappeared into a semi-detached home with a clean garden and a child's bicycle on the lawn. Ordinary, crushingly ordinary. That's the masked predator's love most normality, so complete it makes accusation look insane. The detective sat across the street until the sky darkened, and the light came on in an upstairs window, and he pictured Mred's sister lying in her bed, with a phone by her head and a threat in her pocket. And he pictured this man eating dinner under warm lamps, telling jokes, living a life like the city owed him peace. The imbalance felt like violence. He couldn't break in. He couldn't drag him in on the strength of a photograph and a shiver. He needed a lever, something that wasn't just suspicion. So he returned to the one thing that still had the power to move systems: money. People who are connected don't get that way by floating. They attach, they exchange favors, they owe, they're owed. Somewhere in that web, there's always an account, a payment, a paper trail, a small cruelty recorded as numbers. He asked for access to old business records tied to the docks operation from 1994, the late-night freight runs, the unglamorous logistics where Fox had drifted. The answer came back like a door slammed. Too old, incomplete, archived, not worth the time. He pushed again. He invoked the family's public pressure. He invoked the threat message. He invoked the possibility of ongoing intimidation. Reluctantly, grudgingly, a clerk in a dusty archive room began pulling boxes that smelled like damp cardboard and cigarette ash, boxes full of invoices, payroll stubs, handwritten shift lists from a world that still used carbon copies. He sat in the archive for 2 days, flipping through paper like a monk chasing revelation. Most of it was useless names of men paid in cash, addresses that no longer existed, company stamps from businesses long dead. But a pattern emerged: the same security subcontractor listed on different sites, different months, the same initials recurring like a heartbeat. Not enough to accuse, enough to suggest connection. He traced the subcontractor forward through time. The company name had changed twice, the director names shuffled like shells. But the phone numbers echoed, the addresses reappeared. The paper trail wasn't a straight line. It was a maze built by someone who understood how to make accountability vanish behind paperwork. Then, in a box marked incidents, he found a report dated 4 days after Maeve disappeared. A disturbance at the docks, not a fight, not theft. An unauthorized vehicle at a gate, challenged by staff, allowed through after a phone call. The report listed the staff member who made the call an old supervisor name the detective recognized from his earlier interview. The man who'd mentioned the tarp and the lie about fish, and in the margin, beside a scrawled note, oaked by, was a surname that matched the respectable security manager's, a surname rare enough to make the detective's stomach tighten. 4 days after Maeve vanished, a van, a phone call. Authorization from someone whose face went hard at the mention of 1994. It wasn't proof. It was gravity. He drove to the retired supervisor again, this time without politeness. The man opened his door and looked like he already knew what had brought the detective back, like guilt had been waiting in the hallway 4 years. The detective didn't show the report immediately. He talked first, soft voice, sharp questions, letting the silence do the work. "You said you didn't report the tarp," the detective said. "I didn't," the man replied, eyes flicking to the street as if expecting the past to walk up. "You said you wanted your shift to end." The man's shoulders sagged. And 4 days later, the detective continued, "You let an unauthorized vehicle through a gate after a phone call. You wrote it down. You kept the report. Why keep it?" The retired supervisor swallowed. "Because it didn't feel right," he whispered. "Because it felt like I was being used." "Who called you?" the detective asked. The man stared at his own hands for a long time, as if they were separate from him. "I can't," he said. "I can't say. The detective slid the old report out like a knife. He didn't jab it. He just laid it on the table between them. The supervisor's eyes landed on the margin note, and his face tightened like someone physically struck. "You did say," the detective murmured. "You wrote it down." The supervisor's voice came out strained, almost childlike. "It was a favor," he said. That's what he said, just a favor. "Let the van through. Don't ask," he said. The lads were moving equipment. "Which lads?" the detective asked, though he already knew the answer he feared. The supervisor's eyes filled, not with tears, but with something colder. "The security lads," he whispered, "the ones who thought they owned the place." "And Fox?" the detective pressed. "Was he with them?" The supervisor nodded once, barely. "He was the one in the passenger seat," he said, laughing, like it was all a joke. The words landed like a body on concrete. Passenger seat, not leader, not organizer. A man laughing while someone else drove. A pack, a hierarchy. Marev's disappearance suddenly felt less like a lone predator's impulse, and more like a machine with multiple hands. "Where did the van go?" the detective asked, voice tight. "I don't know," the supervisor said quickly. "I didn't follow it. I didn't want to know. I wanted it to end. But endings are what this case never offered." The detective left that house with a confession that couldn't be used in court without dragging the supervisor into a witness stand and tearing his life apart. And he knew that fear would choke the man the moment lawyers entered the room. He had gained truth and lost leverage. That's what intimidation does. It starves justice before it ever reaches daylight. He returned to the station and requested an interview with the security manager again. This time, the man arrived with a solicitor. Smooth suit, smooth tie, smooth smile. The solicitor's eyes were flat, professional that way, eyes that treat tragedy like a transaction. The detective asked about the doc's report. The solicitor objected to the framing. The detective asked about the gate. The solicitor answered for the man. No recollection. The detective asked about Fox. The man shrugged and said he didn't know him beyond a casual acquaintance. The detective asked why his name appeared on an authorization note. The man leaned back, almost amused. "I had a common surname," he said. "Could be anyone." The detective felt the room tilt. This wasn't a man who feared a lie being caught. This was a man who'd lived long enough to learn that truth is irrelevant if you control what can be proved. The detective glanced at the solicitor, wondered how many crises that calm voice had smothered over the years. When the interview ended, the solicitor shook the detective's hand like it was a friendly meeting. "If you continue in this direction," he said softly, "we'll have to consider formal complaints." Complaints, paperwork, the system's favorite weapon against the people trying to use it. Outside, the detective smoked without lighting the cigarette, just held it between his fingers like a prop, because his hands needed something to do to keep from shaking. He thought about Mev's ring, about the woman's memory of a notched band, about trophies tossed into bins and lost because nobody understood what they were looking at. He thought about the supervisor's whisper, Fox laughing, passenger seat, and he thought about laughter again, the ease with which evil can wear humor like perfume. He drove to Mev's sister's house without calling, because he couldn't keep this inside the station's walls. When she opened the door, her face was drawn tight, as if she'd been expecting bad news and was tired of being right. He told her about the archive report. He told her about the unauthorized vehicle. He told her about the supervisor's memory. He didn't name the security manager out loud at first, because he didn't want the walls to learn it, but she understood. You could see it in the way her jaw set, the way her eyes sharpened. So it wasn't just him, she said. Not a question, a verdict. "I can't say it like that," the detective replied, "because law is built on caution." She laughed without joy. "You don't have to," she said. "I can hear it anyway." Marev's mother sat in the next room, knitting something with trembling hands, yarn looping like a heartbeat. When she heard the detective's voice, she came in, and he watched her absorb the information with a stillness that felt unnatural, like her grief had hardened into a shell. 4 days, she whispered, 4 days after she was taken. They were still moving things. The detective didn't correct her. Taken. The word had become the family's truth, because it was the only truth that matched the shape of their pain. That night, the family decided to do what families do when the system's caution becomes unbearable. They spoke to a journalist, not a tabloid hack, a serious reporter with a reputation for biting into institutional secrets and not letting go. The reporter listened in silence as Mev's sister described the threats, the turned-down photograph, the envelope, the cafe witness, the dead suspect, the doc's report. The reporter asked for documents. The detective didn't give them, couldn't, officially, but Mev's sister had copies of what she'd been allowed to see, and grief makes people brave enough to break rules. The story ran 2 weeks later, splashed across the city like petrol. Questions about the closed case, whispers of a group, hints of a name never printed, but understood in certain circles. The city reacted like a body startled awake. Phones rang, old arguments reignited in pubs. Politicians demanded reviews. The Gardaí issued statements about ongoing sensitivity, and somewhere, behind a respectable facade, someone read the article and felt their control slip by a millimeter. That night, Mev's sister's car was keyed from headlight to taillight, the scratch deep enough to catch a fingernail. No note, no message, just damage, crude and personal. The next morning, she found her tires deflated, all four, neat as if done methodically. Not random kids, not mischief, a warning delivered in silence. She called the detective and her voice was ice. "They're still here," she said. "They're still doing it." The detective stood in the driveway looking at the ruined tires and felt the case transform fully into the present. This wasn't 1994 reaching forward through memory. This was now, living hands, living intention. The system could pretend the file was closed, but the people who feared it opening were still working. He turned to Mev's mother, who stood at the window, watching like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. "What do we do?" she asked, and for the first time in years, the question wasn't about where Maeve was. It was about how to survive the truth without being crushed by it. The detective didn't have a safe answer. He had procedures, he had reports, he had patrols he could request. He had a world of paper to throw at a problem built from flesh and menace. He looked at the woman who'd lost her daughter and still had the courage to stare down a shadow. And he felt something in him harden past professionalism into something raw. "We keep going," he said, voice low, because saying it out loud felt like lighting a match in a room full of fumes. "We keep going until someone makes a mistake." And in Dublin, under rain that never seemed to stop, the streets kept shining like they were washed clean. But the shine was a lie, because somewhere behind those reflections, behind those warm pub windows and ordinary gardens and polished office doors, the old night was still moving, still watching, still trying to turn photographs face down, still whispering rest like a threat. While Mev's name spoken again in print roll through the city like thunder that hadn't decided where it was going to strike, the article hit Dublin like a thrown bottle, not because it told people something they'd never heard, but because it said the quiet part out loud, because it suggested without naming the kind of man everyone knows exists and nobody wants to meet in daylight, the respectable face that can stand behind a desk by day and stand behind a girl in a photograph by night. And when you put that possibility in ink, it stops being gossip and starts being a threat to someone's carefully built life. Phones rang in the station like alarms. The Gardaí's press office moved with that stiff panic institutions get when the story isn't theirs anymore. Politicians demanded clarity with the same hungry tone they use when they smell blood in public opinion. And out on the streets the reaction was messier, more honest. Mothers tightened their grip on daughters' arms. Men glared at each other in pubs as if one of them might be the type who circles shadows in marker. And every old doorman, every taxi driver, every barman who'd ever swallowed a detail felt a hot pulse of regret under the ribs. For Mev's family, the days after the story were a blur of noise and menace-supportive strangers leaving flowers at the gate. Hateful strangers leaving nothing but the sense of being watched. Press vans outside the house like vultures, the driveway turning into a stage where grief had to perform. Marev's sister kept her keys in her fist and her phone charged, and her curtains half open, because fear teaches you rituals you never asked for. The detective asked for patrols by the house, extra passes, not as protection he trusted, but as a message, we see you. He knew it wouldn't stop a determined person, but it might shift them just enough to make them sloppy, and sloppy is how predators become evidence. Inside the station, the official response was a slow-motion clamp. A senior officer called the detective into a glass-walled office, the kind that looks transparent until you're inside it and realize the glass is meant to display you like a warning. The officer's voice was calm, the calm of someone trained to make control sound like reason. "This case is closed," he said, as if repeating it would make it true. "Your involvement is becoming complicated." The detective kept his face still. "Threats have escalated," he said. "Property damage, intimidation. That makes it current." The senior officer looked at him the way you look at a fire you hope will burn out without spreading. "Or it makes it sensational," he replied. "And sensational gets people hurt." People are already hurt, the detective thought, but he didn't say it. He said, "You close files. You don't close the truth." That's when the senior officer slid a piece of paper across the desk, an internal directive. A reassignment, temporary on paper, permanent in practice, a polite way of saying, "Step away." For a second the detective felt a pure, animal rage, not at being moved, at the timing, at the way the institution always finds energy to protect itself, but rage isn't strategy. He nodded. He took the paper. He walked out with his spine straight, because the only thing worse than being reassigned is giving them the pleasure of watching you bend. He called Marev's sister from his car, voice low, tight. He told her what happened without dressing it up. She didn't sound surprised. She sounded tired. "They're cleaning the room," she said. "They're trying to make it quiet again." "I'm not stopping," he said. "I know," she replied. "But they can stop you from being official." Official. That word used to mean power. Now it meant a leash. If the system wanted him out, he would work from the margins. He had a friend in the records office, a woman who'd spent 20 years watching papers bury stories and was sick of it. He met her after hours. She didn't ask for details. She just handed him a list of archived files tied to the doc's subcontractor, the security company's earlier names, the director shuffles, the quiet paper movements that suggested a long habit of hiding in plain sight. "Don't bring these back to me," she warned. "Don't get my fingerprints on your war." He promised nothing out loud, because promises are fragile. He took the list and felt the case expand again, the way it always did when you pulled at the right thread. Meanwhile, the journalist, sharp-eyed, relentless, kept digging on her own line, because reporters don't need warrants, they need sources, and sources are everywhere when fear and guilt start sweating. She got a call from an anonymous number 2 days after her piece ran. A man's voice, older, roughened, asked if she was alone. He refused to meet in the city. He offered a location outside Dublin, a lay-by overlooking dark water where the wind could swallow words. The journalist went anyway, because curiosity is its own kind of recklessness, and because she'd learned that when men speak in secrets, it's because they've run out of ways to stay silent. She arrived to find an old van pulled up at the edge of the road, hazard lights blinking like a heartbeat. The man inside didn't open the door fully. He kept his face half hidden, like shame had teeth. He slid a package through the gap wrapped in plastic, heavy with paper, and said one sentence in a voice that sounded like gravel. "Tell the girl to stop answering her door." Then he drove off, leaving exhaust and dread in the wind. The journalist called Marev's sister immediately. She called the detective second, because even reassigned, he was still the closest thing to a spine the case had. They met in the journalist's office, blinds drawn, lights low, the package on the table like a bomb. The journalist cut the plastic carefully, as if the wrong slice would trigger something. Inside were photocopies and originals mixed together, old incident logs, handwritten notes, shift rasters from the docks, and one item that changed the room's temperature, a small Polaroid. Faded, but still viciously clear. It showed Maeve, not smiling at a camera, not posing, sitting on a chair in a room that looked industrial, bare walls, harsh light, head slightly bowed, hair messy, face turned away as if she'd been told not to look, and behind her, a man's hand rested on the back of the chair. You couldn't see the man fully. Just the hand, the wrist, the cuff of a jacket, and on the finger, a ring with a notch. Marev's sister made a sound that wasn't a word. The detective felt his throat close. The journalist's face went pale with the kind of shock that's half horror, half professional recognition. This was the thing that turns a story into an explosion. The Polaroid wasn't dated, but the paper bundle included a scribbled note, half legible, written like a reminder to self, hold till Monday. Gate Oaked. And beside it, initials. 3 letters that matched the security manager's first and middle name combination, rare enough to make coincidence feel like insult. They stared at it in silence, because silence is what happens when your brain tries to protect you from what your eyes have already accepted. Maeve wasn't a poster anymore. She wasn't a guess in water. She was a moment captured in a room with a man's hand on her chair, and that hand had a notched ring. It's proof, Maeve's sister whispered, voice trembling with something that sounded like rage trying not to become collapse. It's a photograph, the detective corrected gently, because he had to keep his head when everyone else was allowed to shatter. It's powerful, but we have to treat it right. Chain of custody matters. Marev's sister laughed, sharp as broken glass. Chain of custody, she said. They've been breaking chains for 30 years. The journalist, breath finally steadying, said, if we publish this, it forces action, and it forces retaliation, the detective replied. That's when Marev's sister's phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. She didn't answer. It rang again, and again. The detective took the phone from her hand and answered without speaking. For a moment, there was only breathing on the line, slow, controlled, intimate. Then a man's voice, low and amused, said, you don't know what you're playing with. The detective's spine went cold. He kept his voice even. Who is this? A soft chuckle. You tell the sister, the voice said, that some doors don't open twice. The line went dead. They sat there with the Polaroid between them and the call still vibrating in the air like an aftershock. The journalist reached for a recorder, then stopped. The detective held up a hand. Not here, he murmured. Not like this. He drove Maeve's sister home that night. Not in his own car. In a borrowed vehicle. Because paranoia is a tool when someone's trying to make you feel watched. He took side streets. He watched mirrors. Every set of headlights behind them felt like a mouth opening. When he dropped her off, he stayed at the curb until her porch light clicked on, and her silhouette moved behind the curtains. He didn't feel relief. He felt the case pressing closer, because intimidation isn't random anymore. It's reactive. It's responding to what they found. In the days that followed, the detective worked like a man trying to catch smoke in a jar. He scanned the documents from the package and compared handwriting to archived forms. He traced the initials. He cross-checked gate logs. He looked for the Polaroid's background brickwork pattern, paint color, pipe placement, anything that could locate the room. The image gave little, but little is what cold cases live on. A breakthrough came from an unexpected place. A retired electrician who'd once done contract work at the docks and recognized the pipe layout when the detective showed him a cropped section of the wall behind Maeve. The man squinted, then jabbed a finger at the image. That's not the main dock buildings, he said. That looks like the old cold store unit. Back then it was half empty, used for overflow. Lot of lads had keys. Cold store. The phrase landed like ice. Cold store means lock space. Cold store means concrete, steel, quiet. Cold store means a place where sound dies. The detective drove to where the unit had been. It wasn't a cold store anymore. It had been redeveloped apartments, now, shiny windows, secure entry, a lobby that smelled of fresh paint and money. But redevelopment doesn't erase foundations. The detective stood at the edge of the property and looked down at the building's footprint, imagining the old unit underneath, hidden by progress like a body hidden under new soil. He needed access. Officially he had none. Unofficially he had contacts. He found a former dock security guard who owed him a favor from a different case and asked for a quiet look at old site plans. The guard met him in a pub that pretended it didn't remember violence. He slid a rolled set of photocopied blueprints across the table like contraband. The detective unrolled them and traced his finger along old walls, old doors, old storage rooms. One room, small and windowless, sat near a service corridor that connected to a vehicle access point, a room that could match the Polaroid's emptiness. He marked the location. He felt the case tighten into a point. That same night, Mev's mother called the detective, voice raw, saying there was a car outside again, idling at the curb with its lights off. The detective drove over, taking routes that looped, arriving without warning. The street was quiet, the car was gone, but on the wet pavement near the gate, he saw something that made his chest go hollow. A cigarette butt, still damp, pressed into the ground with a careful heel, and beside it, a small silver object that glinted under the porch light. A ring. Not Mrev's, her family had never seen it, but a man's band, plain except for one small notch cut into the metal with deliberate scar. Mrev's sister stared at it on the kitchen table, hands hovering as if touching it might contaminate her. Mrev's mother sat down slowly, like her legs had stopped trusting the world. The detective lifted the ring with tweezers, slid it into an evidence bag, and felt the air thicken with the sick certainty of escalation. Someone had been there. Someone had dropped it on purpose, or left it on purpose, because objects are messages when words aren't safe. The ring wasn't just intimidation. It was a signature, and as Dublin's rain kept falling, washing streets clean while leaving the filth underneath untouched, the detective stood in Mrev's family kitchen, holding a notched ring in plastic, a photograph of Maeve in his mind, and a set of blueprints folded in his coat. And he realized the case had crossed the line into something that couldn't be quietly shelved anymore, because someone out there alive, close, confident, had just reached into their lives and placed a piece of himself on the table, as if to say, "You're not chasing a ghost, you're chasing me." The ring sat inside its evidence bag like a small, cold planet, metal catching the kitchen light in a way that felt obscene, because jewelry is supposed to mean vows, anniversaries, hands held in public, not a notch cut like a deliberate wound, not a signature left on the doorstep of a family that has already been robbed of every ordinary meaning. The detective sealed the bag twice, wrote the time, wrote the place, wrote the names, because if this ever went anywhere, it would go there on the back of procedure. And procedure is the only language the system respects when fear starts shouting. Mrev's sister watched him write, as if each stroke of pen could anchor the moment to reality, as if an incline could keep them from waking tomorrow and wondering if they'd imagined it. He drove the ring straight to the lab, not in a squad car, not with sirens, just a quiet ride through wet streets where headlights smeared into long pale streaks. Dublin looked almost gentle from behind glass, all warm windows and rain-polished stone, and that gentleness made him angry, because gentleness is what predators exploit cities that feel safe enough for people to let their guard down. At the lab, he handed the bag over like he was transferring a live animal. He told the techs what mattered and left out what would poison them, the threats, the envelope, the breathing on the line. He didn't want them spooked. Spooked people make mistakes. He wanted clean work, steady hands, careful eyes. Then he sat in his car in the parking lot and stared at his own reflection in the windscreen, the face of a man being quietly unassigned while a case came roaring back to life. And he realized that from this moment on, every step mattered. If this ring came back with a fingerprint, it would set the whole thing on fire. If it came back with DNA, it would turn suspicion into a name you get warrant on. If it came back with nothing, it would still be something, because even clean objects tell stories clean objects tell you. The person who handled them understood evidence, understood consequences, understood the game. The lab called the next afternoon, No fingerprints worth a damn, to smudged, to wiped, to many partials layered like ghosts. But there was skin cell material caught in the notch, tiny, stubborn, lodged where a careless thumb had rubbed. The tech's voice was measured, professional, but the words made the detective's pulse spike anyway. "We can attempt a profile," she said. "It won't be fast. It won't be perfect. But it's something, something, that word again. It was always something, never enough, but enough to keep you alive." He needed to move on the location, while the ring's biology brewed in the lab. The Polaroid's background and the electrician's recognition of the pipe layout had given him a target, the old cold store unit at the docks, now buried under new development, now disguised as luxury flats where people paid for water views and never asked what the water had seen. Buildings change names the way men change stories, but foundations keep their original shape. He had blueprints folded in his coat, and the problem that wasn't architectural, it was legal. He needed access to basements, to service corridors, to whatever remained of that windowless room. He needed a warrant, and to get a warrant, he needed an official case that wasn't closed and a supervisor who wasn't trying to bury him under reassignment paperwork. He went anyway. He walked into the station as if he belonged there, past desks where colleagues looked up and then looked away, the way people do when they sense trouble and don't want it to splash on them. He requested a meeting with the senior officer who tried to move him. The officer kept him waiting 20 minutes, a silent flex of power. When the detective finally stepped into the glass office, he didn't sit until he was told. He placed the evidence bag with the notched ring on the desk between them, not dramatic, just factual. The senior officer's eyes flicked to it and tightened. This was left on the family's property, the detective said. After a threat, after a published story. That makes intimidation current. That makes it active. The senior officer leaned back, hands folded. Or it makes it someone's idea of a prank, he said, voice flat. The detective stared at him, feeling the line between skepticism and cowardice. "A prank that matches a ring in a photograph linked to the disappearance," he replied. "A prank that arrives after anonymous calls. A prank that keys cars and turns pictures face down. If this is a prank, it's the most consistent prank in Dublin history." The officer's gaze didn't soften. It didn't need to. "You're emotionally involved," he said. "That's the problem. Emotionally involved, as if emotional involvement were a contamination, not the only reason anyone still cared." The detective forced himself to breathe. "I'm evidence involved," he said. "I'm process involved. Give me a warrant request. Give me a small team. Let me document the basement of that development and compare it to the old blueprints. If it's nothing, you can shove it back in a drawer. If it's something, you won't forgive yourself for stopping me." The senior officer's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite a grimace. "And if you're wrong," he said, "you're asking me to authorize a search of private residences based on a photograph and a ring." "Based on intimidation," the detective replied. "Based on renewed activity. Based on credible intelligence that the victim was held in a specific location." The officer tapped the desk once, slow, thoughtful. "Put your request in writing," he said at last. "But understand this, if you drag an innocent man's name through the mud, it will land on you." Innocent man. The phrase made the detective's stomach tighten. He left the office with a narrow slice of permission and the familiar taste of compromise. He wrote the request that night with the careful language of someone building a bridge out of paper. He didn't mention feelings. He didn't mention rage. He mentioned corroboration, the Polaroid, the pipe layout, the blueprints, the doc's incident report, the intimidation, the ring, the lab's preliminary findings. He submitted it. He waited in the worst kind of silence, the administrative silence, where decisions are made behind doors, and you're not sure if the delay is caution or sabotage. While the request crawled through channels, the journalist got a second anonymous call. This one didn't offer documents. It offered a name quietly, as if saying it too loud would summon consequences and a phrase. "He's not the only one." The journalist recorded it. The call ended. The number vanished into the prepaid void, but the name mattered, because it wasn't Fox, And it wasn't the security manager either. It was a third man, one the detective recognized from the doc's paperwork, a contractor, an older figure, the type who arranged shifts and access. A man who could open gates without being questioned. A gatekeeper. The detective met the journalist in a car park, under a supermarket's harsh lights, a place where nobody looks twice at strangers talking, because everyone is too busy pretending not to see each other. The journalist slid the recorded audio across on her phone. The detective listened with his head tilted, focusing on breath patterns, vowel shapes, the little tells of class and region. The voice sounded local, Dublin-born, not young, not old. A man who'd spent years speaking carefully. He's trying to split blame, the detective said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. Or he's trying to point us somewhere. Or he's trying to make sure the story hits the right target, the journalist replied. That was the danger of anonymous sources. They can be truth-tellers, or they can be puppeteers. But the name gave the detective another place to apply pressure, another door to knock on. He pulled the man's address from records and drove out to a neat house with a trimmed hedge and a driveway that said stable life. The gatekeeper answered wearing a cardigan, glasses low on his nose, looking like someone's uncle, and for a second the detective felt that familiar, nauseating clash between appearance and possibility. "Can I help you?" the man asked, polite, mild. The detective introduced himself, asked for a moment. The man invited him in without hesitation, the way confident people do when they don't believe the world can accuse them. The living room smelled of furniture polish, a television murmured in the corner. Family photos lined the mantel, weddings, christenings, smiling children. It was a museum of normality. The detective sat and asked about 1994. The man blinked slowly. "That's a long time ago," he said, smiling faintly. "What about it?" The detective asked about the docks. The man nodded. "Worked there 4 years," he said. "Hard days, good lads, rough crowd sometimes." The detective asked about Fox. The man's smile thinned. "A drifter," he said. "Lots of drifters." The detective asked about the cold store unit. The man's gaze drifted to a framed photo on the wall, then back. "Don't know what you mean," he said smoothly. The detective let a beat of silence settle. "A young woman disappeared," he said quietly. "Maeve." The man's face didn't change, but his hand, resting on the arm of the chair, tightened just enough to show white at the knuckles. Then he exhaled and shrugged, like someone bored by tragedy. "Terrible," he said. "Terrible thing, but I've got nothing to tell you." The detective leaned forward slightly. "A gate was opened," he said. "An unauthorized vehicle, 4 days after she vanished. Approved after a phone call. Your name is on the incident report." The man's eyes sharpened, not fear, annoyance. "Those reports," he said, "were full of mistakes. Names written down wrong. People blamed 4 things they didn't do." The detective watched him. "You're saying someone used your name?" "I'm saying," the man replied, voice still polite, "that you're wasting my time." That was the moment the detective understood what he was up against. This wasn't a man who would panic and blurt. This was a man who'd lived with secrets long enough to furnish a room on top of them. The detective stood. He didn't threaten. He didn't shout. He just let his eyes rest on the family photos as he said, "If there are things you want to be remembered for, now is the time to decide what they are." The gatekeeper's smile returned, gentle as a knife. "Good day," he said. Outside, the detective sat in his car and felt the familiar frustration claw at him. The gatekeeper had shut the door with perfect politeness, and politeness is harder to crack than anger because it leaves no opening to pry. He drove away with no confession and a new certainty. If this was a group, the group had evolved. The drifter died. The respectable man grew older. The gatekeeper settled into family photos. The case didn't close. It aged into a shape that could survive. 2 nights later, Mev's sister woke to the sound of her letterbox. Not a knock, not a stomp, a soft metallic clink, the sound of something sliding through. She lay still for 10 seconds, heart hammering. then moved like she'd been trained quiet, controlled, phone in hand, light off. She crossed the hall and saw an envelope on the floor, thicker than the last, heavier, as if someone wanted it to land with authority. She didn't open it. She called the detective. He arrived in 10 minutes. Though he knew he shouldn't, though he knew he was no longer assigned, he couldn't stop. He took the envelope with gloves and placed it on the kitchen table, where the last threat had sat, and for a moment the room felt like a ritual space, the same light, the same air, the same ache. They opened it together. Inside was a single sheet of paper and the key. The paper had 3 words typed in block letters: Service Corridor B. No signature, no flourish, just instruction. The key was old, brass, the kind you don't see much anymore, with a small stamped number on the head. The detective turned it over and felt his pulse rise. Keys mean access. Keys mean places. Keys mean someone has decided to shift the game from intimidation to direction, either out of guilt or out of calculation. The journalist arrived soon after, breathless, eyes wide. She stared at the key like it was a live snake. "This is someone guiding us," she said. "Or someone setting us up," the detective replied, "because hope is how traps are baited." Then his phone buzzed with an alert from the station. The warrant request had been denied. Not fully, not forever, deferred, more corroboration required. More justification, more time. He looked at the key on the table, the typed words, and felt the case twist into a cruel paradox. The system wanted more proof before it would let him search the place that might contain the proof, while someone unknown, alive, close had just delivered him away in. Marev's mother, silent in the doorway, stepped forward for the first time. Her face was pale but steady, the steadiness of a woman who has run out of patience for cautious men. She looked at the key, then at the detective. "You're telling me they won't let you look," she said, voice low. "They won't," he answered. "And someone else is letting you," she said. And it wasn't a question. It was a fact that tasted like poison. The detective didn't respond immediately. He held the key between finger and thumb and felt the weight of it, the way a small piece of metal can carry the gravity of decades. He could hear his own heartbeat. He could hear the rain against the window. He could almost hear the sea beyond the docks, that endless moving dark that keeps secrets better than any safe. In the quiet that followed, the typed words sat there like a door in the air service corridor B, and every instinct in him screamed that stepping through a door offered by an unknown hand is how you die, professionally or literally. But every other instinct, older and uglier, said that justice rarely arrives through approved channels, that sometimes truth is found because someone inside the darkness flinches and drops a key. He placed the key back on the table, slowly, as if the movement itself needed respect, and he said, "If we do anything with this, we do it right. We do it with witnesses. We document everything. We don't go alone." Marev's sister nodded, jaw tight. The journalist nodded, eyes gleaming with fear and purpose. Marev's mother didn't nod. She just stared at the key like she could see her daughter at the other end of it. And in that stare was a whole city's exhausted demand. Enough whispers, enough threats, enough closed drawers open the door. Outside, Dublin's lights kept shining on wet streets, reflections quivering like nervous hands, and somewhere out near the redeveloped docks, under polished lobbies and expensive paint, a service corridor still existed, still dark, still untouched by headlines, waiting like a throat. And the detective could feel the case pulling him toward it, not gently, not kindly, but with the relentless force of something that had been buried too long and was finally pressing back up through the ground.